Welcome back to another episode of the Hodge-Cast. On this show, we've discussed multiple ancient megalithic sites, from Göbekli Tepe, Machu Picchu, and the phenomenal Great Pyramids of Giza. Today, we're going to do a big deep dive on those sites and then some. And what better way to have this discussion with someone who actually lives by a megalithic monument, Stonehenge. Welcome to the show, Hugh. It's a pleasure to have you down here in Liverpool.
Thanks for having me on, Daniel. I appreciate it, man.
No, pleasure's all mine. I've been following. I actually, do you know what? I stumbled across you. I was trying to think about this on the way here today. I actually first found you on the history ancient aliens stuff, and I thought, it's a British person. I want to, generally it's quite dominated this space by Americans, so it's quite refreshing. And then obviously I went down the rabbit hole, as it were, and here we are having a conversation. Yeah. So, but I appreciate you coming up, Hugh. I mean, it was quite late arrival for you last night, wasn't it?
It's okay. I'm a night owl. It's all good. Yeah.
And of course, you're quite well travelled. Do you know what? Rather than me sort of explain who you are, give a little bit of your credentials and why you're sort of qualified to have this discussion.
Yeah, basically, as you mentioned, I live very close to Stonehenge, the kind of ultimate megalithic monument of these isles. And that's a real treat. It's strangely quite haunted, my house as well, which is a bit of an odd one. I did an entire podcast and ended up talking about that for about an hour, all the incidents we've had there. But yeah, I've been studying the megalithic stuff since, as long as I can remember, probably 20, 25 years, something like that, on and off. And I really got into it because my mum, she when we went on these family holidays, she wouldn't go to like beach holidays. She'd go to megalithic ancient sites. I have this fond memory of seeing the Minotaur's throne in Crete when I was like 8 years old and something like this. And so, yeah, I've got a fond memory of that. But I really got into all this stuff through more esoteric means. Mm-hmm. I was interested in things like crop circles, and even I was quite into like the whole UFO thing when I was young. My parents subscribed to the Unexplained magazine. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe.
I got many copies, but I do know what you're referring to.
I actually found the old kind of things. You put them all into a folder recently, and weirdly, some of the authors who wrote some of the articles and that ended up people I got to know, like John Michel and others. So that was quite. So I kind of grew up with that kind of in the back of my mind. But really, as soon as I started visiting the megalithic sites, everything just kind of clicked. I've got a background in. I studied like journalism. And
so that's very reminiscent to Graham Hancock.
Yeah. Okay. So I studied journalism and also, film and documentary production, even radio production back then. There was no such thing as a podcast when I was doing my studies in London Guildhall University. And so I've got a background in writing and research and things like this. But then the megalithic stuff really sort of took over. And we ended up founding the Megalithomania conference back in 2006 with my friend John Martin and also Gareth Mills, and this is actually this year is our 20th anniversary.
Oh wow!
So it's all happening, yeah. So that's been going strong for that many years, and we just focus on the megalithic arts and sciences. And we set this right. This is quite interesting because we set this conference up, which based upon something that's become quite an issue online and everywhere in that whole ancient mysteries world. We set it up as a stage or like a platform to debate the megalithic arts and sciences, but also to make it very clear we want academics to come in, we want historians and archaeologists, but we also want the alternative people and, fringe researchers, some people call them, to be on the same stage and have an open discussion. And so back in 2006, we set it up for that purpose. And in fact, at our very first conference, we had people like Graham Hancock come and Andrew Collins and others. And we've kind of stuck to that throughout, and we invite top archaeologists, top historians, anthropologists, and everyone else, and they actually have a really good time. And there was this concern for many years that they would come and they would be kind of dismissed by the alternative heads, because we're based in Glastonbury, the conference. So this is like the Sedona. If people don't know, it's like the Sedona of England. It's like the hippie kind of out there town. And now we have all the Flint, Dibble, Grant, Graham Hancock stuff. We have all these kind of attacking each other online, currently taking place. And we set that up. We tried to create that bridge 20 odd years ago. And so we feel like we're very strongly focused on that now. And this year, for instance, we have like Dr. Fabio Silva coming in. He's actually a top archaeoastronomer. He runs the Skyscape Academy, runs courses. I'm actually on one of the courses right now to study really intricately the whole idea of, archaeoastronomy, how megalithic sites link with the stars, the sun, the moon, and everything else, especially because we made certain discoveries at sites like Karahan Tepe, which kind of pushed me to kind of study this properly and like try and eventually get a paper published about our discovery. And so, I'm very much in both worlds. I mean, I've got no academic affiliations as such, but at the same time, I really appreciate what archaeologists do, what people like Fabio Silva do, what other anthropologists and historians are putting out there, because that's where the real data gets collected, and I feel that's really important. But also, you got to have an open mind and interpret things from different disciplines. Mm-hmm. And again, this is why we set up Megalithomania, the conference. It's kind of something I've kind of lived by, where it's got to be a multidisciplinary approach. I think I said that wrong, actually. But we've got to have different angles of different researchers coming in who aren't necessarily archaeologists, who aren't just looking at the ground. They're looking at the sky. They're looking at the symbolism. They're looking at the magnetism of sites, the acoustics, and other such things. And so I feel that approach is very important.
It's quite refreshing to hear that, Hugh, because often when I do have people on the show and we talk about this, there is that lack of collaboration from the mainstream and the alternative, let's say. The mainstream kind of get labelled with this dogmatic approach, but I actually find a lot of the alternative are quite dogmatic in their approach too. Yeah. And I would be considered alternative, I guess, with this show and the people I've hosted. But you strike me as someone who, you mentioned being about open-minded, but you also strike me as someone who's got a level of common sense as well, and you're sort of got to find that happy medium. That's where I proudly sit, and I feel as though I love a good conspiracy. I'm happy to hear whatever you want to throw at me. We've had David Icke on the show. I'm welcome anybody with any sort of thought process, but that does need to be backed up with some level of evidence. And obviously you bring that in abundance, I guess. And I suppose we should dive straight into it. Do you want to go with Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah. I mean,
for a bit of context for the listeners, I'm sure most people listening to this will know, but Göbekli Tepe was that was sort of like the big monkey wrench, wasn't it, in the mainstream? Because for years people were saying that there are no megalithic structures older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge and the pyramids, and then of course Klaus Schmidt, Göbekli Tepe came along and threw a spanner in the works. So before you show us some of your work though, why is it archaeology? There doesn't seem to be that much of a focus, or maybe I'm not looking deep enough, but from my understanding, there's not that big of a focus on Göbekli Tepe. There is from the alternative side, but not the mainstream. Why is that?
Yes, it's a strange one, really, isn't it? It's because it's based in southeast Turkey. People aren't aware of the site. It's based in southeast Turkey. It's just near Şanlıurfa, the ancient city of Edessa, and I love that town there. And the site, there's multiple sites there now, not just Göbekli Tepe, but it dates to at least 11,600 years ago. Just after the end of the last ice age. So it's just after the Younger Dryas, that whole kind of thing that took place. I know you've had Randall Carlson discussing things like this, and this is so astonishing. I mean, it really only got announced to the world in the year 2000, although in the mid-1990s, it was being excavated. It was actually found in 1960s, around 1963.
Go on.
But they weren't sure who or what it was. They wasn't sure if it was actually an ancient site or whether it was like a Byzantine or Islamic grave site or anything like this. That was actually an archaeologist back in, I think it's 1963, Peter Benedict and a whole team, and they were doing surveys across the whole landscape throughout the whole region. And it wasn't until Klaus Schmidt kind of spotted a couple of artifacts that the owners of the land had brought to the museum, and this was probably in the late 80s, and then he realized by the mid-90s there's something significant here, because he'd already looked at a site and excavated a site called Nivali Churi, which has now been covered up and flooded by the Ataturk Dam. But Göbekli Tepe itself, when they started excavating, it all just started happening. I mean, the thing is, these are completely buried sites. I mean, at the end of their use, we're talking, they were in use for about 1,500 years. Then they were completely buried deliberately by the kind of people at the end of that era. And so they got preserved. They got perfectly preserved. And so that's what's so astonishing. And we're talking about multiple stone circles, basically, carved, but each of the stones is carved individually with beautiful reliefs on them, set in different arrangements, usually 12 or so stones with 2 big central T-shaped pillars, with beautiful 3D relief carvings all over them. The whole base of it is carved out of bedrock. And then they kind of placed the stones. And even today, they've only excavated a small amount of it. I mean, I think I should show you this image, because this is the one here. This just shows you an overview of the main enclosures that have been uncovered so far. There is another area that they've started working on as well. But the whole site, I mean, each of these is roughly, between 40 to 65 feet wide.
Wow.
Up to 70 feet in some cases. So they're pretty big. I mean, they're like not that much smaller than Stonehenge. But if we look at this one here, we can actually see that there's a much bigger site going on. This is like a GPR scan that was done of the site. And you can see there's multiple enclosures across the whole hill. And we're talking multiple acres here. I mean, there's something like 22 acres. Or 9 hectares of construction. So we're not just talking like one stone circle, like you get a Stonehenge or you get an Avebury. We're talking like potentially 20 or more. That's just one site. And we've got to remember there's officially 12 or more sites, but we think there's reports that there are 38 sites in the region. Other reports say there's 100. But look at the scale of this. And so this is what's so astonishing about this to me, is that it's absolutely huge. And I first went back there in 2013. That was my first visit. I was really fortunate. We set up actually a tour there with Andrew Collins, and Graham Hancock came along.
I was going to say, that's quite a good trio of people.
Yeah, so we were very chuffed. And it was actually Graham's first visit there as well.
Oh, wow. Okay,
so this is before they built the kind of roof over it and everything like that. And it really, really got me. It really blew my mind. There's something about it. I mean, it was Andrew who got me into this. I got to give Andrew Collins full credit here. He really got me into this. He was writing about this region back in the 90s, predicting stuff was going to be found there. And then it kind of happened. And so I've got to give him full credit for that. But Graham's really into it. He's been promoting it as well. Mm-hmm. Andrew has, obviously, myself and my partner, JJ Ainsworth. And there's a few other people like Martin Sweatman and a couple of others who've been looking into it and been researching and writing about it. But there's not many of us. I'm surprised. I'm quite surprised how few of us are kind of focused on it. But it's become one of my main focuses because, number one, there shouldn't have been anything around at this time. And you mentioned in the introduction, we're talking like back in the 90s, just a bit of perspective here. There was people like Hancock, there was people like Robert Schoch, the geologist, who were talking about the Sphinx, being much older and things like this. But there was no smoking gun of this civilization that was around, 10, 12,000 years ago, the era they were kind of talking about then back in the 90s. And it's only when Göbekli Tepe got discovered, suddenly that smoking gun appeared. And it's like, boom, here it is, people. Here is the missing kind of chapter of human history in your face. And so it appeared and it's there. But seriously, not that many people are that bothered about it.
Yeah, which really does baffle me.
It is a bit baffling, yeah.
It would be such, for anyone who does this extensive research, what a great load of ammunition you've got over in Turkey. I don't get why more and more people wouldn't speak about this.
I agree, and it is quite baffling. I mean, this is, for example, this is enclosure D. This just shows you. This is actually a 3D scan I kind of got from walking around the edge of it, and this is a typical kind of structure we have here. Each of these central pillars, they're about 18 feet tall, so that's 5.5 meters. The enclosure itself is about 60 feet, about 50 or 60 feet wide. I've actually been working on all the measurements and the metrology of this as well. And all the base of it is carved out of bedrock. And there's actually a curb kind of around the edge. You can kind of see that around the edge. And so they actually create this semi-subterranean base. And then they kind of leave these kind of pedestals in place, carve a little bit out the center of each of these two pedestals and place these gigantic T-shaped pillars within them. And then have all these carvings. I mean, these are actually anthropomorphic. They've actually got arms coming down the side of them. They've got hands coming around the front. They've got belts on. But the heads, the kind of abstract heads are just these kind of, rectangles of stone with nothing on them. They're kind of blank. So it's a very unusual, very abstract, very bizarre styling, but beautifully created. We're talking like seriously sophisticated. And this is nearly 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, this again, just a bit of context for those who aren't familiar. This was meant to be during a period when the world was just really full of hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there wasn't people shouldn't have been able to create such amazing sights and artwork and, you know, 3D. Really, it really is just one of those mind-blowing sights, really, when you go off the mainstream timeline, which kind of makes you think. I mean, the hunter gatherer, because I was having this discussion with Michael Button, who you're familiar with, and he's always perplexed by who came up with the hunter gatherer, like as a species of human. Who sort of why is it that hunter gatherers? Why do we just say and accept that that's what people were back then?
Okay, this is actually a subject I've been writing about a lot.
Okay, well,
yeah, this is actually going to be a big part of the next book that me and JJ are working on, and I think people disrespect the hunter-gatherers too much. I mean, because it's a name. The problem with it is that the name has kind of connotations of savages, of like people wandering about, you know, with straggly hair, you know, like just grabbing food, and you know, they were very sophisticated people, and we can get into that, you know, today, because what I found is that the hunter-gatherers were much more sophisticated than people realize, and as we'll see very soon, they had an understanding of the night sky. They had an understanding of the solstices and the equinoxes. They created beautiful artworks, you know, and this is even before the time of Göbekli Tepe. We got back into the Paleolithic era, for instance, Upper Paleolithic in France and Germany and places like this. They were creating all these caves, which I want to talk about shortly. But if you go way, way back and you actually look at the anthropological data of hunter-gatherers, you see that they were very obsessed by the night sky, the solstices, and creating symbolism which was matching what they were seeing. And I think that's really important to understand, that these were not savage type people. They may have been hunting, they may have been gathering, but you know, everyone has to survive. They had the same brain size as us, and in some ways, I believe they were smarter, you know, because they had to survive. We've got it too easy, you know. You know, we don't have to go out and try and, you know, find a beast.
We don't hunt or gather now, do we?
Yeah, we don't have to go out and try and find a beast to, you know, murder and eat and skin and, you know, get the meat off the bone or anything like that. We don't have to worry about stuff like that. So they had to do it to live, to survive. And so I think there's different elements to that. But we know that when it comes to Göbekli Tepe, for instance, they were hunter-gatherers, because the whole agricultural revolution didn't kick in anyway until sometime after Göbekli Tepe was built. For a long time, it was thought that agriculture came first, then these kind of structures came afterwards. But now that's been turned on its head. The archaeologists agree on this as well, that definitely these structures were being built, then agriculture developed in that precise region. I mean, literally, like 50 miles north of Göbekli Tepe, or northeast, we have Karahan Mountain. This is where the first einkorn wheat was ever found to be grown and kind of produced and controlled in a particular kind of growing style. You know, the first farming, really. And that wasn't until at least 200 or 300 years after Göbekli Tepe. And so what's going on there? So did the building of these sites actually trigger the agricultural revolution? This is one of the big questions. It's something we're going to get into in our book. And the reason why I think this could be the case, this is a bit controversial, but I'll bring it up now.
Well, we like that, Hugh, so be as controversial as you want.
Because I believe, you know, this is something that not everyone agrees with. The academics kind of laugh at me about this. But there was a magnetic anomaly was discovered. We've got some of the research here from Paolo de Bertolis from Trieste University. Back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, a team from Trieste University went into Göbekli Tepe. And we'll come on to why that's linked with what I believe could be the inspiration for the agricultural revolution in a moment. But firstly, they went in there, they did some acoustics research and found infrasound, they found other frequencies which were kind of connected with the human brain. And they pretty much proved, beyond doubt, that these sites have acoustic properties. And this is a whole other area of research which fascinates me. But what's really interesting is that when they were there, they had their magnetometer set up with them. So they recorded what they found was a spiraling magnetic anomaly in the center of the main enclosure in enclosure D. This is the one we just looked at. This is like the main enclosure, the one with the beautiful, pillars that are still intact. And right in the center, they did multiple tests and got all the data down. But unfortunately, within a few months of that, Klaus Schmidt died. And the next archaeologists wouldn't allow them to go back in and continue their research. Naming no names here, of course. But that's kind of what happened.
You can tell me off camera, it's fine.
And basically what they found is this magnetic anomaly. So clearly this is a natural feature in the landscape. This is part of a kind of fault zone anyway, because even when there was, 3 or 4 years ago, there was some earthquakes in Gaziantep and that whole general region. It was felt at Göbekli Tepe. It was felt in Şanlıurfa. In fact, the clock tower in Şanlıurfa slightly collapsed because the tremors were felt in this area. So this is a known area where magnetic anomalies could occur in the whole limestone area. And the reason that's interesting because of the work of John Burke and Kaj Halberg in their book called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, which came out in 2005. John Burke died, unfortunately, a few years later. But he researched probably several hundred sites around the world and recorded all their magnetism, the telluric currents that are present at these sites, and the fact that he found many traditions relating, especially Native American traditions, relating to these were like where you place your seeds as offerings. And so, but what he found was that there was a scientific aspect behind these traditions. So if you go and place your seeds, they would be charged up and you get a good crop. That was the tradition. But then when he tested if you actually placed your seeds at specific sites, in certain areas at sites, or certain days or times of the day or times of the year, it would charge up the seeds. So when you then go and plant them, you get a higher yield crop. And he realized this was it was almost like a seed enhancement technology that the ancients had understood. And this was all based upon magnetic anomalies and telluric currents, which is what we find at Göbekli Tepe. So we have to question, did they experiment with this kind of stuff? And we're talking hunter-gatherers here. They were experimenting with magnetism and seed enhancement, acoustics, beautiful 3D relief carving, obviously. And as we'll soon see, they were studying the night sky as well. But I think that they quite possibly got this understanding of magnetism down. They to me, they were like natural dowsers. They were like geomancers, basically studying the natural subtle energies of the earth. And these not only affect your consciousness, this has been proven as well by John Burke and people like Michael Persinger and others, but also the same energy can enhance and stimulate seeds. So when you plant them, they grow better. You get a high yield, stronger crop, larger crop, frost resistant and other such things. And so there could be a case made that the whole agricultural revolution accidentally got started, quite possibly, or quite deliberately, we're not sure, because of the way they were manipulating the energies at these sites.
I'm always fascinated when it comes to hunter-gatherers. I'm doing that in inverted commas for those listening. Just a side note as well, I think this podcast is definitely one to actually watch because Hugh's got a whole plethora of slides and images here. But going back to the point I was getting to about sound is I always find it fascinating when people talk about the hunter-gatherers or the ancients who manipulated. The theory, of course, is that they could manipulate sound, and then that ties into potentially how they move these objects as well, which I'm sure we'll get into. But it's fascinating. What was that experiment? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was basically, I think it was more to demonstrate the effects frequencies have. And they played this, so they put like water. I don't know the science behind it, so apologies, but they put water against a speaker and they tested it before they played the speaker and then afterwards. And there was some sort of chemical, wasn't it? It was an imbalance to what the substance should be, but it was to demonstrate how frequencies have an effect on the world around us.
That's a study of cymatics.
That's the one.
Yeah. This is Hans Jenny and others have looked into that. That fascinates me as well. I got quite into that a few years ago. My friend Jake Ewan, who's a bit of a engineer, like musician type guy, he kind of got me into that like many years ago. I actually mentioned that in my first book on earth grids.
Okay.
We talk about that because often, sound, certain frequencies, not only do they affect consciousness, this is quite well known now. And there's a whole study of archaeoacoustics. And this is how this got discovered at Göbekli Tepe. This is how this magnetism got discovered, because they were doing archaeoacoustic research there. But what Hans Jenny found is that he would, vibrate certain frequencies, often based on the human voice, but often through certain machines he had. And it would create certain geometries. If you increased or decreased the frequency, it would create different shapes, with the powder or the particles that were placed on these kind of flat metal plates. And this blew people's mind when it came out.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, because it shows you that the invisible has an effect. Mm-hmm. I think this is, this whole idea of the invisible having an effect is something very much what needs to be addressed when looking at these ancient sites, because we're not just talking about sound or cymatics. We need to look at the energies like the magnetism. We need to look at the geometries as well. We talk about geometries being formed from sound and things like this. We'll get into the geometries soon, because this is mind-blowing when you start looking at what's being found at these sites in southeast Turkey. They should not have known this kind of stuff back there. And also the astronomy, which is really hard to detect unless you know what you're looking at. And so that could be seen as an invisible kind of force. But there's a lot more to it than people realize. I think the archaeologists do a fantastic job, that they focus on what physically can be found, but there's different things to look at. We have to look at the symbolism, we have to look at the number, we have to look at the geometry, we have to look at all these different aspects, the acoustics, the energies and other things like this. And this is why you need to have this alternative approach to interpreting these sites. I'm really quite strongly focused on that. But also, what the archaeologists need to understand is that these aren't technically out there subjects. These are sciences, a lot of them now. Yes. Archaeoastronomy is now a science. Archaeoacoustics is now a science, thanks to people like Paul Devereux. Astronomy is like the obvious one we need to kind of focus on, I think. That's one thing I've very much become kind of as part of my agenda, to promote what's going on in southeast Turkey. Because it's being put out officially that there was no astronomy at any of these sites. And that really frustrates me, because clearly there was. I mean, we've found an alignment. You can go and witness every December the 21st at Karahan Tepe, for God's sake. You can actually go there and see it for yourself now. It worked even better back, 11, 12,000 years ago. And so, when it comes to things like, the acoustics and all these invisible sciences, they need to be addressed when studying these sites.
It ties into, you mentioned it moments ago about you believe that the ancients were probably smarter than we are now due to all the distractions. And you mentioned there about astronomy. If they had such a vast understanding of the night sky, then why couldn't they have a vast understanding of sound, frequencies, magnetism? I'm pretty certain they probably could, because they probably didn't have the distractions. Well, they didn't have the distractions that we have here in modern society. So you can dedicate your time and your attention to these things, and probably in great detail as well.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think this is heavily overlooked. And I think you're right. The distraction, we are so distracted. It's unbelievable. We've got to do podcasts all the time. we've got to make videos for YouTube.
Yeah, I try and make a point of not going on my phone. If I've got a day where I'm not doing any content, I'm not. I try and think, right, okay, I'll look at my phone, and then I can do a couple of hours, and then I'm checking it again, and it's serving a purpose. I'm communicating with people, but then I do fall into that trap of just doom scroll, and I just think, if you actually tallied up the amount of times I do that on an annual basis, it's probably a lot of time that I've wasted. Just needlessly looking at
I agree, yeah.
rubbish on the internet for, let's say, cat videos. I don't know, I've gone off them now. But yeah, bit of an insight into my history. Could be worse. But we've completely gone on a tangent here, I guess. But no, I do find it fascinating how I find the discoveries fascinating, but I find it frustrating that they are just dismissed as pseudoscience or you're a kook for saying that.
I know, it's frustrating. I mean, it's one of the issues, with this whole study. And I think, I'm at a point personally, so is JJ and several of my colleagues and friends who are doing this research, that you kind of got to ignore the haters and just focus on what you're doing. And I find that is a very important point of focus that, people need to kind of, Don't worry what other people are trying to put you off or tell you, you're no good at, it's all rubbish. Just focus on it. Because if you've got a belief in it and you feel there's something in it. And that's one of the things I've focused on personally, is that I would happily discuss anything with an archaeologist up front, because I know everything I'm talking about, or 95% of it at least, is backed up by academic papers. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, this acoustics research, this magnetism research. I put it out there, for example, on X recently. I just put a little clip of another podcast where I was talking specifically about this, magnetism. And I got dismissed by the head archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe as it was all rubbish. And I got these other people jumped in and said, oh, it's just fringe stuff. You're just talking all this stupid alternative stuff. I said, no, actually, here's the paper. Here's the link to the paper from the University of Trieste by these archaeologists and researchers. So I put it out there. And then the head archaeologist said, oh, I forgot you. I was actually there when they were doing it. And I was like, oh, okay, thank you.
So deflect a shield up. That's just a reactive response.
Yeah. And then I've been putting stuff out about the geometry, which we'll hopefully get onto in a minute. And I'm finding very specific geometrical principles and even measurements as well. They shouldn't have known. They shouldn't have had these standard units of measure back then. Then, there's academic papers talking about these standard units of measure being used, not just at Göbekli Tepe, but going back into Natufian times up to 14,000 years ago. So what was going on there? How did they have this kind of, measuring units going back to this era? It wasn't supposed to be anything like that.
They maybe had their own variation of what we would consider math, geometry. Do you think they had their variation of that just so we can get to that conclusion based on our, more so yours than mine, understanding of math? But they must maybe had their own way of doing things. Is that?
Well, yeah. You look at let's look at this.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Pull some up.
So this is an image, right? Let's look at some of the geometry. I think this is a good point to bring this in, because we've got the stone circles of Britain. We've got the wonderful work of Alexander Thom, who was a Scottish engineer and teacher at Oxford University, and he basically surveyed up to nearly 600 stone circles in the British Isles from 1938 right up until the 1960s. And he discovered a whole series of particular geometries. These were different egg shapes, flattened circles. Obviously, the perfect circle was the main one, but also ellipses. And it kind of blew his mind, and it created this sensation when his books were published in the late 1960s. And even though he was a top academic and a teacher at Oxford University, he got ridiculed. Absolutely ridiculed. And I must remember, he also, while he was discovering all these geometries, he found two other aspects which were important to Göbekli Tepe, as we'll soon see. He discovered a standard unit of measure, which he called the megalithic yard, which is 2.72 feet or 0.83 meters. He discovered, this is all within the stone circles, he found astronomical alignments at a majority of these sites, often incorporated into the angles and orientations of the geometries he'd found, which is a whole other thing. He found evidence of Pythagorean triangles within these sites. These are whole number lengths within triangles. And he kind of put this together, and it was all, his books are so hard to read. I mean, it's a struggle to get through them. They're really technical. None of the archaeologists at the time couldn't understand any of it. Even today, you read it and you're struggling to kind of get into the mathematics of it. It's very complicated, but he backed it all up. He did the research. He went out there, he studied, he measured, he did the whole thing. And so that kind of created this sensation. It took about 30 years for his research to be recognized as reality. And only then did archaeoastronomy become a known and kind of published science as part of archaeology itself. But the geometry and the mathematics has never been taken up by academia to this extent that he got to, basically. Apart from there's alternative research, you could call them, like the late John Neal and the late John Michel, two of my kind of heroes, who kind of took it to another level when it comes to the number science and the measurements, which we'll get into shortly. But I want to just point this out because we've got these geometries here. We've got it's 8 of them here. These are from Alexander Thom. But so I just basically wanted to check to see if any of these apply to any of the structures at the sites in southeast Turkey. And to my surprise, they did. I mean, this is a flattened circle modified type B. This is one of Alexander Thom's geometries. And it is almost a perfect fit. In fact, I would say it's a perfect fit for enclosure C at Göbekli Tepe. Now, this shouldn't be allowed. It shouldn't exist back then. How would they know how to create? This is based upon Pythagorean mathematics. They shouldn't have known this back then. So that really got me. But then you can apply that a bit further, and you can actually find that many of the structures there have these different geometries, the egg shapes and other such things. In fact, enclosure D, this central one here, is actually an egg shape. This is one of the geometries, one of the rare geometries, one of the extra ones that Alexander Thom found. So it's only found in one stone circle, actually, in northern Scotland somewhere. But this is based upon two Pythagorean triangles of the numbers 5, 12, 13. And this 5, 12, 13 comes up at Stonehenge as well. So we have this going on. We also have the bottom right there. We have Karahan Tepe, which we'll come on to in a little while. And so that really got me. And the other thing is that the geometries we're finding at Göbekli Tepe are also found in very ancient Egypt before the pyramids. We're going back to 7,500 BC. We have the site of Nabta Playa. We have the same egg-shaped geometry, and there's astronomical alignments built within this at this site on pretty much in the the southern border of Egypt in the Nubian desert. And Nabta Playa is a very important site in the whole history of even how Egypt came to be developed as well. And so I'm absolutely fascinated by the fact that we're finding geometrical principles at play in Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and now we're finding them at other sites, which we'll get onto in a moment. But if we look at this image here, just on the bottom right there, okay, I've probably got an image somewhere else. Let me see if I can find it. A large image of that. Yeah, here we go. So this is one of the geometries. This is actually at Karahan Tepe. This is one of the other sites I want to talk about in more detail, because this really shouldn't have been known at this time. This kind of geometry just shouldn't have been known. And then we get into the numbers, and this is where it gets really crazy, okay? Because all these lines and shapes that make up these megalithic kind of almost like stone circles, there's actually a whole series of numbers that are associated with them. So I did a whole analysis of the measurements, and this was partly based on, if we look at this image here, this is actually partly based on the top right there. This was a paper that was published with the yellow line and the triangles. That was actually a paper published by Avi Gofra and Gil Hackley. And they're archaeologists from Tel Aviv University in Israel. And they did some analysis, and they found that the three main enclosures at Göbekli Tepe create a perfect equilateral triangle with very specific measurements of each length of this perfectly kind of equilateral triangle, which we'll get onto in a second. And what is so interesting about that is that the measurements that were then found, and this is a gentleman called Adam Tetlow who did some research on this and transferred the meters or the feet they were using into ancient measurements. And he found that they were using things like the Persian foot, which is 1.05 English feet, the Sumerian palm, the Royal Egyptian foot, and things like this. And they were perfect. They were like whole numbers they were finding within these sites. So we're not talking 13 and a half or whatever. We're talking about the whole numbers. And this is my analysis. Now, it's going to hurt your brain a little bit to look at this, but hopefully I'll explain it for people who are just listening in audio. Basically, I kind of got every old map I could of all the sites, all the different enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, and I tried to measure them based upon the maps. Because weirdly, and this is really weird, there's no official measurements have been published of Göbekli Tepe.
What?
They're all about or roughly or estimate to be, so-and-so. Like, for example, enclosure D is estimated to be 10 meters wide and things like this. It's not actually the exact measurement, and I'm like, how is this possible? So I'm actually putting it out there. Archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe, let me in and I'll do some measurements, because they've cleared it away now. They've cleared away enough rubble, especially in enclosure D, so you can actually measure it, because the whole outline of the kind of stone circle is carved into bedrock. So you just have to measure the carved area. You don't have to measure between the pillars. You just measure the carved area from one extreme, north, south, east, west, and so forth. And what I found is that there's a whole series of ancient measurements that they've been using. And this absolutely blew my mind, because there's this old canon of measurements that was developed by John Michel, then John Neal. And they found that everything, this is actually it here. Again, this is hard to take in a podcast situation, but they found that there's a whole series of slightly different foot lengths, like the Persian foot, the Assyrian foot, the Sumerian foot, the Greek foot, and so on and so forth. And all of them seem to be based around the English foot, which appears to be the oldest measurement. And they're all slight variations, either slightly longer or slightly shorter than the English foot length, but all harmonic fractions apart from it, perfect harmonic fractions. So it could be 20 to 21, like, for example, I think that's with the Persian foot. So you can easily work it out in your head. And all these different fractions that kind of divide up these different lengths. Now, this might seem arbitrary, it might seem, nonsensical to a lot of people, but many of these lengths are based upon the measurements of the Earth and the measurements of the degree length at specific latitudes, because it slightly changes as you go north because the slight bulge in the shape of the Earth. And so what we're finding is, and what I've found here, and which is blown my mind, and I'm still working on this currently, I'm still sort of developing this, is that they had an understanding of the size and shape of the Earth nearly 12,000 years ago. So how could that possibly be? How could they know that? This is one of the big questions that we're going to really get into in the book. We have people like, Graham Hancock, who's a big hero of mine. I've been, studying his work since he first put out Fingerprints of the Gods. And he claimed that all the old maps prove that there was a much earlier understanding that the Earth had been mapped in deep antiquity, going back to beyond the past, the Ice Age and so forth. And now that seems to make sense. The evidence I'm finding proves that they had an understanding of Earth measurements. And so this is where it kind of starts getting quite deep, and we have to kind of analyze what's going on here, because if that's the case, then how did they do that? What were they doing? How did they get to these northern and southern areas of the planet and do this? And so, so something I'm looking into, and I think, there's good evidence if you start looking into like the old texts, like the Book of Enoch and the biblical texts and myths and, legends and stuff like that. There's sort of this talk about measuring and taking chords and going to measure and things like this. So it needs to be looked at again. And so I really want to get the exact measurements of the, I think I've got them right, because I've used every map that's ever been published of Göbekli Tepe, and I've gone in there on a giant screen, intricately, capturing every little, and I got some scans of some areas of some of the sites and got precise measurements there. But I really want to get in there and with a tape measure and kind of find out
what's the clearance. Do you need some? Because obviously it's a huge tourist site now, isn't there? Did they get rid of those olive trees that were growing there?
Yeah, the olive tree. Yeah, they're gone. Yeah.
Oh, they've fully gone now.
Yeah, thank God.
So how do you let's say if you wanted to get access to go in there and really measure everything to the exact number, how would you go about doing that? You
probably need to be an academic and be friends with the archaeologists.
Right, so it's one of them,
yeah. But no, I mean, I'd love to. I mean, I'm actually chatting with the head archaeologist, Lee Clare, a little bit on X. He's kind of, partly disagreeing with some of the things I'm saying, but actually we've had a very interesting, healthy debate about some of the things I'm interested in and I want to kind of look at. Because basically when you're looking at astronomy, geometry and measurements and magnetism and acoustics, these are recognized as basic sciences that that aren't fringe. This is genuine academic, people can study these subjects. So I've been having healthy debates with them. I don't go too far out there with my research. I don't make too many wild claims. I do a few. You speculate based upon what you found, and things like that.
You referenced the Book of Enoch, and we've had multiple conversations on this, me and other guests, about religious texts, and they have to have originated from somewhere. I'm not saying that they're 100% accurate, but
exactly. They got to come from somewhere.
They've got to have stemmed from somewhere.
It's not just made up.
So I do think. I mean, the whole time he was outlaying that, apart from having to bite my tongue, saying, "Don't say aliens, don't say aliens." When you're looking like, well, how have they observed the scale of the Earth? But we can maybe get into that a little bit later on. But no, I do find it, and also what's equally frustrating is you would think that if your findings turned out to be accurate, is that not going to strengthen more tourism? Because I know
yeah, exactly, I agree. Yeah, I mean, and let's go back to that point you made about getting permission and things like this. And so, I mean, one of the other things I really want to do, and I don't know if for some reason the archaeologists at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan are very fond of me, or Andrew Collins or JJ Ainsworth, my partner. We've been out there. We know all the families who own the sites. We've become friends with them before even Karahan Tepe was excavated. We were friends with the owners. In fact, Andrew's known them since 2004. Wow. That far back, and I've known them since 2014. And so they don't really like the fact that we're kind of friendly with these people. We get access to places, away from the archaeologists. And so that's a problem. And for some reason, we kind of are disliked because they think we're just out there fringe theorists talking rubbish. And I think that's really a little bit unfair because we're relatively sensible, me, JJ and Andrew, for instance, and Graham is as well, in my opinion. Very sensible. We're not like making wild, stupid claims. These are genuine claims we're making. And we want to kind of push forward the idea that these people were more sophisticated than we're being told. And I think the fact that that's being pushed kind of downwards, like, no, they weren't as sophisticated as you're saying, Hugh, I think that's a problem. I think we need to kind of address that hunter-gatherers, this is that hunter-gatherer thing again, were much more smart. They were much more sophisticated, intelligent, and visionary. They had visionary ideas that they built into stone at sites like Göbekli Tepe. And so I think we need to, and it just needs to be addressed. All these different studies need to be looked at much more carefully, And you talk about the Book of Enoch, now you could mention the aliens thing. Don't get me wrong. I love ancient aliens.
Well, you brought them up, yeah.
Because I've been on the Ancient Aliens show for many years.
Of course, yeah. That was how I remember, yeah.
But I rarely talk about it. I don't think I mentioned aliens for the last 8 years or something. But I'm very much focused on being invited on to talk about ancient sites and the kind of thing we're talking about now. And this is what they kind of get me on to do the show anyway. But I've got huge respect for that show. I think it's a really good, because what it's done, that's got really cool subjects like these Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, all these acoustics, metrology, into the mainstream, onto TV all over the world. And it's one of the only shows, one of the only channels that's actually allowing all that stuff to come out into the mainstream. And so before like podcasting on the internet really took off, they were doing this and it was getting out there worldwide. So it really helped me kind of grow, my research. I got much more exposure. That was quite nice. But actually the most important aspect of shows like that is, it's got this alien kind of overview which sells, so people want to watch it, so it gets more people watching. But actually when the information comes through on the show, some of it is really good.
Oh, it's fascinating. I could go back and sit and watch one of those. I could probably binge watch multiple episodes. I mean, I was watching, we've got I'll probably get into Egypt, so I'll probably mention this a bit more, but Christopher Dunn, we've got him coming on the show later on this year.
Amazing.
And I'm rereading the Giza power plant, and again, tying into sort of ancient engineering, we're talking about sounds and frequencies. It makes it just seem like I actually buy into these more than I do the stuff we're fed in the mainstream, particularly where the pyramids are concerned. I mean, I don't think anyone's buying that narrative that it was slaves and mud and sand and,
the pyramids are so weird. I mean, let's just quickly, we'll come on to Egypt later or whatever, but this, they're so abstract. Yeah, they're so strange.
They're fascinating. They're
I cannot, people sort of, this is why I like Chris Dunn. I mean, I've got a huge amount of respect for Chris and what he's put out over the years. I mean, he's like a solid scientist, engineer dude.
He's like 80 now as well, and he's still, I hope my cognitive function still is on the ball, and if I get to 80, let alone.
But it's similar in a way. It's like Göbekli Tepe and the pyramids have. To me, they have similarities. They have all the acoustics, the geometry, the metrology, the astronomy, all encoded within both of all these different sites. But when you go inside the pyramid, and even just looking at them on the landscape on the Giza plateau, it's so abstract. And this is what Göbekli Tepe is like. It's like this abstract art. It doesn't make any sense. You go inside the pyramids, you're not going into like a temple structure. It's like you're going into a dirty warehouse in Streatham, London or something. That's what it looks like. But it's so precise and accurate and perfect that it's got this alien quality to it. And I feel that with Göbekli Tepe. I'm not saying aliens built it. I don't get that. But
that will now be spliced and be a viral clip. You do know that, don't you? Okay. Not from me, but from mainstream.
Right. But it has this kind of otherworldly quality. You just can't quite grasp the human mind coming up with sites like these. But let's just jump back because you were talking about...
that's what you're off balance there,
no, we're going off on loads of cool directions here. We're talking about the Book of Enoch, for instance. This is a fascinating study. I mean, I know you've talked about this before with other guests. Again, this is Andrew Collins, really got me into this. His book, From the Ashes of Angels, he goes deep into that. This was before Göbekli Tepe was found. He was writing about this whole area, and he believes that the Book of Enoch, the Garden of Eden, was partly based all around the southeast Turkey area. But there's some passages in that which really get me. And this is the whole thing about the angels or the watchers taking cords and going to measure to all these different latitudes. They actually talk about different latitudes. They talk about different climates and weather. They talk about flying to these areas, which is, to me, is an interpretation of traveling. This doesn't necessarily mean flying, moving on to these different areas around the world, taking cords, going to measure these different latitudes. And there's even a whole passage that talks about being inside this very northern latitude, being inside what appears to be some kind of stone circle construction, and light coming in at different times of year through the different windows, i.e. the gaps between the stones. It could even be Stonehenge, we don't know. It could be an earlier structure that was around before that time. But they clearly talk about these different climates, these different latitudes, taking cords, going to measure, and all these other such things. And I really believe that the Book of Enoch is talking about the era of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. I really do, because how on earth could they have an understanding of Earth measurements without having some understanding of the Earth being measured at some point? This is where we come back to Hancock's work on, and Charles Hapgood, on the ancient maps that have been discovered all over the world that appear to show the Earth being mapped in deep antiquity, going back, tens of thousands of years potentially. So I get a feeling like the people at Göbekli Tepe, they were sending people out when they were first starting to build the site. And this is at the end of the last ice age, so all the cold weather had changed, all the warm weather had come in, things had settled down. There'd been cataclysms happening for 1,000 or more years. And they probably wanted to go back and remeasure the Earth, because it was probably something, they were probably doing that beforehand, maybe, but they wanted to do it again and get it right, with all the changes that had taken place. So there's no reason why, they literally could have walked, it would have taken a while, to the northern tip of Scotland, because Doggerland was there, joined up with Europe. So you could like follow the land through all the way to Scotland. And, so you can, right up to where the ice sheets would be at that time. So like, because of the Gulf Stream and everything, you could have got to, Aberdeenshire in Scotland, and it would have been free of ice. So you could have gone to that level of latitude, like 50 or 60 degrees up, and made your kind of recordings of the different shadow lengths of certain poles and things like this. So then you could have worked out, the lengths. Basically, if you raise a 5 meter pole or a 3 meter pole, you take the same length at different latitudes on the same day of the year, you can actually work out that the Earth's round, or certainly roundish, and you can work out the lengths as well if you're mapping as you go north how far you've walked and things like this. It's quite simple. You can actually measure the Earth quite simply if you know what you're doing. And I think the people back then had that. I mean, if you look at the watchers being written about in the Book of Enoch and in some of the biblical texts, other biblical texts as well, they seem to talk about them being very advanced. They were metallurgists. They were studying the weather. They were studying the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars. This is clearly written in this Book of Enoch. They were surveyors. They were building things. They were growing food. They were doing experiments. They had breeding programs and things like this. And so it gets quite in depth. And you think, well, that's a little insight into the mindset of who I believe they were talking about, the people who built Göbekli Tepe. And so I think there's something in that, so I think we have to kind of consider that they may have had teams being sent off to different parts of the world, as far as they could go north, as far as they could go south, as far as they could go east and west, just to get basic measurements. And this is why I think they were incorporating these measurements into their sites.
It's interesting how the Book of Enoch isn't considered biblical canon, but yet the Bible and elements of the Torah reference some of the passages in the Book of Enoch, which always, for me, it kind of. I mean, I don't conform to any major religion. I don't know what your beliefs are, Hugh. So I'm going to caveat this. I'm not insulting anyone when I say this, but I just feel as though a lot of the stories that are told in religious scripture, one could argue maybe are what one could say is mythology.
Yeah.
So how come they cherry pick what they want to be canon? That's always been, whenever people start cherry picking in any aspect, but we'll stick on religion, it always has a bit of a red flag for me. And I feel as though maybe let's take the Book of Enoch a little bit more serious than what scholars would do.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I'm not like religious as such, but I have my own kind of routines for keeping myself in good mental health and focus and everything else. But it comes to that. I mean, I look at like these ancient texts. I mean, I'm very much of the school of. Do you know the book Hamlet's Mill?
I know a brief overview. I've not read it. No.
So this is also something that JJ is very much into. Is like the very ancient mythology. Going back. I mean, there's some mythology that goes back 100,000 years, and it can be traced. And JJ Ainsworth has done some astonishing research on this. People can check out her lectures on our YouTube channel, and she's going to be writing about it in our book, obviously, because some of the mythology are so old. It's kind of bizarre, and many of them, and this is what Hancock pulled into Fingerprints of the Gods from Hamlet's Mill and other places. They were studying precession, so this is like the 25,950 or so year cycle, 26,000 years roughly, and and all the numbers associated with that, like 72 and 144 and so on, were encoded within many of these myths. So they were kind of, but not even kind of, they were clearly marking astronomical movements of the heavens into their myths and stories, because these were the way things were communicated back then. This is how it was done. Things were communicated very accurately through many different generations, potentially tens of thousands of years. And the myths never changed. They kept them very tight, very secure as to what they were talking about. And often numbers were just thrown in there. So then it would become, you don't mess with the numbers. The numbers have to stay in there. That's the most important aspect of these myths. So things get recorded in myth that are a genuine knowledge, deep knowledge that goes way, way back. We even have, talking about straight line alignments in the myths of the ancient British Isles. We have the myths of giantesses dropping stones from their aprons. It sounds like a strange thing, but you get that in Malta, you get that in some parts of North America, you get that in ancient Britain and Scandinavia, for instance, where you have a giantess. This is one example. You have a giantess, would be striding across the landscape, and in the myths or the legends, she would talk about, she would be carrying these megaliths in an apron. And then at some point, the string of the apron would break and the megaliths would fall down, and that's where that megalithic site was. And she would continue, and another knot or string would break at that particular point, and another stone structure would be created along these straight lines. So several of these would be part of this straight line alignment. We have the goddess or giantess Sansuna of Malta, who has that story associated with her. They don't talk about the apron. She dropped stones from her shoulders and things like this. But so what that's saying is that they're talking about dead straight lines. So we're talking about alignments, or what Alfred Watkins called ley lines or lays. But also they're talking about like surveying the landscape. And the string is very important, because the string was the cord going off to measure. And so knots on a cord or a string or a rope is the measuring device that probably would have been used, probably made of hemp, going back into antiquity and things like this. And so it's all this encoded stories, like talking about measurements and straight lines and surveying. And then you get talk of triangles in the landscape as well. You get that in Wales with the giant Idris and Cadi Idris, the mountain in Snowdonia, where he would survey from his mountaintop domain this giant chair, the chair of Idris, or Idris's throne. And he would throw stones in certain directions, and they would create triangles in the landscape, all coming back to the point where he threw them from. And again, the triangles in the landscape is something, we can look at that here as an example. This is what Robin Heath's found in the landscape of the British Isles, these giant triangles linking up all across the country. But we also have this in southeast Turkey as well. We don't just have it in, places like, Britain and other areas. We actually have it in Turkey. Let me just find that image for you if I've actually got it here. Yeah, so look at this. So we've got this here. So we're finding straight line alignments between the sites in Turkey. We're finding triangles between the sites in Turkey as well. And so we have these myths that could even go this far back. So this gets a little bit complicated. For those that are just listening, we apologize. But basically what we're finding is, this is also, I want to give credit to Howard Crowhurst here. I do highly recommend you have a conversation with him at some point. His stuff is mind-blowing. Also Robin Heath and John Michel, and others. There are other researchers who've kind of done some work on this, is the kind of geodesy of the landscape. So basically, this is the study of the arrangement of sites over great distances that seem to form into natural or very sophisticated patterns, like triangles, like alignments, even squares and other such things in the landscape, as though they were mapping and marking each of these points with megalithic sites or earthworks or some other structure. And now we're starting to find that as more and more sites get discovered in southeast Turkey. And so not just in the British Isles, which has now been pretty much very well documented by these kind of researchers. So there's a lot of this going on. There's a lot of this kind of placement of sites is very, very important. I mean, even Graham Hancock was talking about this. He was finding all these connections around the world and how the Omphalos, the Axis Mundi, was the Great Pyramid of Giza. And this seems to be what's happening pretty much everywhere.
I think with Graham Hancock and people of that ilk, they have, as much as, I mean, I love Graham. We had him on the show, and I'm privileged to be able to call him a friend as well. We speak over email quite frequently. And I think the issue is Graham has, not his intention, but he's developed a bit of a cult following. And the vast majority of people who are in said cult are of the outlandish beliefs. So there is that stigma attached, and that's probably why you occasionally probably get shut down, because you've had beliefs, even though they're not outlandish, you've come to a very educated conclusion backed up with evidence. But because, oh no, you're talking about Göbekli Tepe or the pyramids. No, he's a kook, he's a pseudoscientist. And I just feel as though there's that stigma attached to people like that, which is frustrating because, okay, there are people who do have these really huge leaps of opinions of things. And yeah, okay. But that doesn't then, you can't attribute that to everyone else who has a somewhat similar opinion. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I have had some quite out there ideas over the years.
Oh, you will have. Yeah, I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Hugh.
I mean, you got the books on the giants there and stuff like that.
We do need to come to those.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean that's a really interesting study, but we'll get onto that later. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah. I think people, God, I cannot believe people even criticize Graham Hancock personally, because honestly, I've read all his books. I know him personally over the years. He's spoken at a conference, he came on our tours, and he's so intelligent. And he backs it up, mate. He has more references in his books than anyone I know, and he just so detailed. It's really hard to dismiss him, really. And I just don't think these academics, these people who are dismissing him, have read his books.
They've not read his books. Yeah. They've certainly not spent time with him. I mean, he's such great company to be around. On the few encounters I've had with him, and he's what you see kind of on camera when he gets going and he's articulating and telling all these I've got to say tales then, but backing up his evidence. He's exactly the same off camera as well. And obviously you've been to sites with him, but what a high honor that would be. And I don't get why he's completely disregarded. I think it is that level of dogma, and it is, as you've pointed out, I don't think people take the time to even read his work. They're just, he said the Sphinx is however many years old. Well, we're dismissing that as pseudoscience.
It's true, yeah. And the other thing is he's sold millions of books, which there's a lot of jealousy going on as well.
Oh, well, I think you're going to get that in all aspects, even away from sort of like lost history. Yeah.
But I think I'm just frustrated because it's like, great. We have these academics, these archaeologists, huge respect to them all, don't get me wrong. But why are they taking it on themselves? If they think that all the fringe stuff is just fringe and it's ridiculous, why are they even worried about it? Because, so they must think, oh, they're onto something here. Otherwise, they wouldn't come back and attack the fringe ideas.
Do you think it's down to, so obviously, we're going to go conspiracy mode here, but do you think it's maybe like there's financial aspects? Are they trying to create a dogma around that of this is what we've taught in all the education systems and that's what we're sticking with? So if someone like yourself comes along with all this evidence for Göbekli Tepe, it's like, well, we can't have that. We don't talk about that in schools. That's not on the curriculum.
Yeah, it could be a bit of that, I think. Yeah, but I think it's more, can I say, ego-based? I don't mean that in too much of a negative sense, but I think they have their own. It's almost like an academic belief system, and they have to kind of stick to their guns. And it's hard to change an idea about a site, for instance, until it's published in academic papers. It's not even going to be looked at by academics. I think I'll give you an example. I mean, we'll come on to this. I want to give you a bit more detail about this Karahan Tepe winter solstice alignment that myself, JJ, and JJ discovered back in 2021, where it won't be recognized, even though you can go and see it for yourself every year, and it's a ridiculously cool phenomenon. It's not accepted as being real because it's not published in an academic journal.
Okay.
That's it. And that's it. That's basically the reality of it. And so, we are going to have something published.
This is probably ignorance on my part. When you get all these discoveries put together, how would you go about getting that peer reviewed where it can then be considered? Oh, actually, that Hugh Newman, JJ, they've got a valid point here.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. Let's just get let's get on.
Let's go Karahan Tepe because I found it fascinating.
Let's use this because this is an example of what you're talking about as well. This is so we can talk about the discovery. We can talk about why it's an issue getting it kind of recognized. Okay. So this is let me just explain this. This is what's called structure AB, or the pillar shrine, as Andrew Collins named it. And this is about 18 feet wide. It's carved out of bedrock. I've got a better image of it here, actually. We can actually see it moving around.
So those are bedrock.
Apart from that one that's an odd shape, like a serpent kind of cobra shape, all of them are carved out of bedrock. So there's 10 of these pillars.
And how do you think they did that?
Well, this is limestone, so it isn't too tough. You can do it. You can do it with bone tools and obsidian and things like this.
Oh, all right. So that's not as outlandish as I thought.
No, but the fact is, this is like no one's seen anything like this anywhere in the world.
I was going to say, that's why I asked.
At any era. I mean, this is like, 9,400 BC. But the thing is, you've actually got, let's just look at this as well. This is structure AA, and then you've got structure AB. And look at this, you've got a serpent tail on it. You've got these structures, you've got this giant enclosure next to it as well. So much of this is carved out of bedrock. Huge area. The whole area on the right there is carved out of bedrock. That's 75 feet wide, that main enclosure.
75 feet
wide. The main enclosure.
Because there was a person on that then as well, just for scale.
That's
Again,
it, yeah.
If you're audio, get on the video.
Yeah, so let me just describe this if you're on audio. So basically at Karahan Tepe, again, like at Göbekli Tepe, it's in the Tek Mountains. It's about 25 miles south east of Göbekli Tepe. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's like a Martian landscape. It's crazy. It's like no vegetation there, nothing. And this hill, which has then been covered over the site completely. It's been deliberately covered over. But on this particular, quite large, elongated hill, on one edge of it, well, actually, they've found it pretty much all over the hill now. But on the kind of northern edge of it, they found these enclosures. And one of them's 75 feet wide, so it's even larger than anything at Göbekli Tepe. It's very similar to Göbekli Tepe. But next to it, you've got these two other enclosures. There's actually it's a bedrock porthole stone, like a hole carved out of the bedrock that goes between the main enclosure and structure AB, which you can kind of see on the left there, just about. And this is where the light comes through on the winter solstice, which we'll come to shortly. But then you've got this enclosure, AB. This is like the kind of pillar shrine where you've got this head carved out of the bedrock. It's like 3 times the size of my head, or 4 times. It's huge. And it's emerging from the bedrock like this. And then it's overlooking all these 4 to 5 foot tall pillars, which are carved out of bedrock in front of it. So what on earth, what is that? And then next to that, you've got another small enclosure called structure AA. It's just like a pit. And it's almost like they had water in. One of the theories. So what happened was we were there on, in fact, look at this. This is a good example. So this is what the site looked like before it was excavated. So it's just a hill. So basically, it's just a rough, rocky limestone hill. If you didn't know, you'd think there was nothing going on there. It's just absolutely nothing. But all this area here, this whole northern area to the left is completely being covered up, deliberately buried. Now, if we go to what it looks like now, it's a whole different story. So all of this has been uncovered.
So how long has that been getting excavated?
It's only since late 2019.
So, oh, wow.
Yeah, not much, not long. A huge amount has been uncovered. So we've got like 15 enclosures.
So what was the catalyst for someone to decide to excavate
Well,
that?
they knew something was there. This was back in 1997. There was an archaeologist called Bahatin Selik of Haran University, which is a local kind of Şanlıurfa university. And because Göbekli Tepe was being investigated now, he decided to look around. He heard all these stories and rumors of sites all in the region. And one of them was Karahan Tepe. So he went there and he found various T-pillars just lying around and sticking out the ground. Like the tops of them were just sticking out the ground. Like, you know, even when we were going there since 2014, up until 2019, we went there several times before it was excavated. You walk up the hill and there'd just be a hill, all these like little tops of T-pillars just sticking out the ground like this far. And it was like this, we were like, there's something. What is under here is going to be mind-blowing. We just didn't realize how mind-blowing it was going to turn out to be.
The transition there from it not being excavated to that is nuts.
It's pretty epic, yeah, you got to admit. But then when it did get excavated, it's like, oh my God, we're not just talking about Göbekli Tepe type enclosures. We're finding all these weird structures with these pillars within them and things like this, like structure AB. And, you know, there's an unfinished, 18-foot pillar lying on the quarry side of the western side of the hill. But yeah, this is pretty amazing, really, when you look at it. And yeah, so we went there, a whole story, I'll briefly outline the story. Basically, I went there, I think on the 19th of December, 2021. I met up with the owner, or the owner's son, who I won't name. And I have a drone with me, so I kind of got he kind of gave me permission to fly my drone. But then I got in trouble for it afterwards because I know, and it became this problem for him and for me. I was like, oh my God, we shouldn't have done that. But we both went ahead with it and thought it was okay. But then we both got, told off and in trouble for it. But the good thing is, because I did that and caused a bit of a problem, we were going to go back the next day because I went there on my own just to have a quick look because JJ was busy doing something else, and we were going to go back the next day and have a proper day out there. The forecast was better. This would be December the 20th. We were going to go, but I got a call the night before after I'd flown my drone and got in all sorts of trouble from the owner's son. I said, no, you can't come tomorrow. We've got all the officials are now coming. If you turn up, they know you've flown your drone. You're going to get arrested. You're going to get in trouble. I said, what time are they coming? He said, they're going to come in, late morning. I said, we'll come early morning then. How about that? We'll just come in the morning. He said, no, they're going to come earlier. And I was like, we'll come even earlier then. So we got there when it was dark, just before sunrise. And because we were forced to go early, we saw the sunrise happen and this phenomena take place. So if I hadn't flown my drone, I hadn't got in trouble, he hadn't called me to tell me you can't go, so we went earlier, we would never have captured this.
Some law of attraction stuff.
It was
right
like
there,
serendipitous. So, and basically what we saw was this. We saw this head being illuminated down one side. And we were like, what the hell is going on? And me and JJ couldn't quite work out what was going on. And then we quickly realized over 45 minutes, this blade of light moved around the head from like the right side of the head all the way around, then slowly went down to the mouth and down to the neck. And even on the neck itself, where it finishes, there's actually a V shape, like you get the V shape with the light, which you get carved on a lot of the statues there. You get this V shape kind of insignia, but also it's serpentine kind of scales carved down the neck. So it's got this serpentine symbology. So it's almost like a serpent coming out of the rock with a human head, with the mouth open, and the eyes, strangely, are actually looking towards the hole. Now, you're thinking, well, what do you mean the hole? If you're just listening to audio, basically the light, this blade of light comes through this whole stone accurately, and it only works on the winter solstice. Now, the winter solstice is where the sun reaches its most southerly point on the horizon before it then starts heading back north towards the equinox, which is east, and then the summer solstice, which is like northeast. This is like southeast, basically. the most southerly easterly point down on the horizon there. And so as soon as you get out of the winter solstice era of around December the 21st, then the sun won't hit the head. It won't come through the hole and it won't hit the head. So it's very precisely aligned to this particular time of year. So we analyzed this. We took it to another level. We had Andrew Collins and archaeoastronomer engineer Rodney Hale help us. And we backtracked, the time scale to 9000 BC, 9400 BC, and found that it worked then as well. The same movement of the sun would work. It'd be slightly different. It'd be like a degree difference, but it would still work. The head would still get illuminated through this thin hole, only 70 centimeters wide, at an angle as well. And this head would be illuminated. So this was clearly a deliberate design of the builders of Karahan Tepe. This wasn't accidental. So when me and JJ saw that originally, we were like, what the hell is going on here? We just thought, we're just documenting this. We'll figure it out later. But clearly this is got to be, only going to happen this time of year. We didn't know until we went back and analyzed everything. And we were just astonished. I mean, you can actually see it here. This is actually, if you actually, for those that are listening, I apologize, but this is a time lapse, speeded up. If you look at the head, you can see the way the light moves around. This was actually filmed the next year. We went there the following year in 2022. We also went back in 2025 as well. And you can see the shape of it kind of going around the head. And then as soon as you get a few days after or before the solstice, nothing happens. No light comes through because the angle doesn't allow it. And so this is clearly a solstice marker. And so we analyzed that further. We worked with a gentleman called Kevin Esslinger. He basically is a 3D graphic designer. We partly reconstructed Karahan Tepe to see if it would work. But the interesting thing, before he was working with someone else, actually Matt Simpson of Ancient Architects, and then I got introduced to him, as well. And they were trying to pretty much, partly reconstruct a bit of Karahan Tepe, but also try and disprove my winter solstice alignment, or mine and JJ's winter solstice alignment. But then once he put it all together, he realized, it works even with the stones in place. If you put the stones, nothing blocks it. It all goes through pretty perfectly. It goes through two outer stones on the outer ring. It goes through the two central T-shaped pillars and perfectly goes through the hole at an angle only on the winter solstice and illuminates the stone head. So there's all this theory about roofs existing at Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. And so this is why the archaeologists don't believe any astronomy took place, because they believe they used to have roofs. So that's an interesting idea, but there's no evidence for roofs. There's just a couple of negatives of where they think wooden beams once existed, now rotted away, have been found at Göbekli Tepe. And so there's no real evidence for roofs, but there could be roofs. So we kind of went along with that. He reconstructed a roof based upon the reconstruction of the site and found that the light still came through the gaps in between where the poles would be, really almost like perfectly, and the head still got illuminated. We took that to another level and we built a thatch roof over it. And even if you just put one small window, which you have to have windows in these roofs, this is based upon Native American traditional Pawnee design roofs of, there's certain ways of doing these roofs. This is how probably it would have been, something like this. We go back to Neolithic times. Just having that one little window there that would allow perfectly the illumination of the head to take place. And so we realized pretty quickly that even with roofs, you have horizon-based astronomy, which is what this is. It's when it's just above the horizon, that's when it all happens, because it's coming through before it reaches the height of the main roof anyway, where it would be. It's coming in between the pillars where the roof would sit up on top of. And so that kind of blew our mind. So anyone who's into astronomy will understand that this, or archaeoastronomy relating to ancient science, that this makes sense. This isn't, we're not pushing, we're not like fudging the numbers or fudging the reality to do that. He actually put the whole night sky of 9000 to 9400 BC in place with the full 3D reconstruction to check this out. He wasn't, speculating. This was like properly done. He's got no agenda. He actually tried to disprove us to start with, so he wasn't going in there on our side. He was like trying to disprove what we had found and ended up proving it. And so that really, we were so happy about that. And then I've done a statistical analysis on this as well, and found that, now this is just done using AI, and I'm now studying with Dr. Fabio Silva at the Skyscape Academy. I'm doing a 15-month archaeoastronomy course, and at the end of it, we have to have a kind of published paper that can be proven beyond doubt. So I'm gonna have that by the middle, next year sometime. And the statistics that I carried out, I worked out that it would be the chances of that alignment happening by chance are 3 million to 1. So it's pretty accurate. It's pretty solid. It could be 1.5 million to 1 if you like slightly extend the width of the hole and things like this to allow the light to come through. But at least it's probably 3 million to 1 chance. So this isn't something that's just accidental. This is a deliberately designed, and hopefully we're going to prove that academically by the middle of next year or later this year, hopefully. And so that is intriguing. So just want to put that down as like the thing that myself and JJ were delighted to be, to witness this. And we're not trying to make wild claims with it. We think this is genuine, and we want people to give their own opinions on it. We're not 100%. We want to get the academic angle on this as well. But what this does prove, though, is that even with roofs, which a lot of people claim existed at these sites, they can still function as astronomical aligned places, and they were recording this. And so I think this is a really important aspect. And now one of the other issues is that there's no evidence for these roofs, and this is a big debate I'm having now with various people. But even if there was, it doesn't matter now because it all works.
It works for you. You've indicated regardless.
Yeah. So, and when we found this, we thought this was the oldest, solstice alignment on the planet, and it probably is. It probably is the oldest known one at the moment. But remember, Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe and all these sites, only very small percentage has been excavated. Mm-hmm. So loads more of these alignments could turn up, and we're not just talking about, when you talk about alignments, like a Stonehenge, for instance, we had the summer solstice alignment. It's not, nothing really gets illuminated like the Stonehenge does here. It's even more precise than Stonehenge in some ways. And so that's what I find completely fascinating. But since then, we've found a whole bunch of obviously there's lots of other winter solstice alignments around the world. We've written several articles about this, and we go into, great detail at Newgrange, for instance, Chaco Canyon, Nidra in Malta. Jericho even has a summer solstice alignment as well, which we can, talk about some of these. And even Martin Sweatman, he published this paper here in Time and Mind Journal about calendrics. He even found that in the pillar shrine where we have all the 10 pillars and then the 11th kind of movable pillar, he found that he believed could be a lunar solar calendar, primitive lunar solar calendar, where you could work out the kind of annual cycle quite clearly. And now with the winter solstice phenomenon hitting the Stonehenge every year, that could have been the pinpoint of the yearly beginning point of that particular calendar. So we feel our discovery backs up what he's written about, and he's had this peer-reviewed and published in a scientific journal. And also he analyzed Pillar 43 at Göbekli Tepe and found similar calendrics on that as well. So again, there's different people coming in from different angles and finding these astronomical principles at play at these sites. And yet officially on Wikipedia, all the archaeologists 100% dismiss all of it. There's no astronomy at any of these sites at all.
So what do archaeology, what do they claim its purpose was?
I think they believe for a long time, this is what Klaus Schmidt believed. He believed it was a temple, like a ceremonial site only. But since more excavation has taken place, they found structures that appear to be domestic at these sites, built in and around the main enclosures. These are usually square or rectangular shape. But what's unusual about them, which gets me, is that even though they claim they're domestic or people were living there, which we're not so sure about, because many of these structures, these smaller square structures, actually have T-pillars within them. And the T-pillar really is the sacred object. It's like an image of like the kind of deity, the god, in our opinion. And it's highly likely it is, based upon when you look at JJ's research. She really goes into this, the symbolism of the T shape and everything else. And so why would you have this sort of sacred kind of T-shaped pillar in your domestic structure? You wouldn't need one in there if it's just for domestic purposes. So we feel like these could be pilgrimage sites where you'd move around. This is something that hunter-gatherers used to do. You look at the Aborigines, you can look at certain Native American traditions, you can look at even like Anatolian traditions that go way, way back, where they would like move around to different sites at different times of year. You get that in the Tufian culture as well, which goes back even older, in the Levant, goes back even older than the structures in southeast Turkey, where they seem to would move around for different seasonal movements of the different plants or trees that would grow, the animal migrations, birds and fish and other such things. And so they would move about, but then they would stay at these places while they were there. And so they would have to have somewhere to sleep and live while they're there, because they found evidence of cooking and things like that. But to us, that doesn't mean they lived there all year round. This is like one of the debates as well going on between the archaeologists and the more alternative people. But fundamentally, they were studying the movements of the stars. And I think that can't really be dismissed anymore. And I think that needs to be addressed. I mean, let me just show you a couple of more images here, because just for those that aren't too aware of Karahan Tepe, this is a really cool vulture statue that was found in a new enclosure at the top of the hill. It's only about 2.5 feet tall.
I mean, just the precision of that.
I know.
When you go into the context, I know we're kind of debunking that a bit here, but you go into the context of the mainstream hunter-gatherer was supposed to produce that.
I know this is one of the things, and then we have this one here. That we have this 7.5 foot tall statue. This is the same enclosure on the right as that was found at the vulture. Then we have other, and weirdly, this is an odd one. They seem to have these false beards on them. There's 2 statues they found in it. They seem to have these strange false beards, and this is what
like the pharaoh type.
Yes,
beard.
Exactly like the pharaoh type. This is what's so odd. It's almost like the Sphinx as well. So I find that really intriguing. Then you have specific haircuts, very, very well depicted.
Probably style at the time.
Yeah. And then you have things like these beautiful giant square enclosures, all carved out of bedrock, this. And then when you have walls built up around it later. Again, this is, you shouldn't be having this in 9,400 BC. The accuracy of this is quite astonishing. Then we have beautiful stone bowls, ceremonial objects that are placed, these stone plates we find as well, all across this particular area. It gets
the
wild.
plates? Is it got the calling the kitchen? Is that
they
that
found?
right?
Yeah, they found. Yeah, they call it the kitchen. Yeah, this is one of the areas they've kind of found.
And that is based on. Is that if you go with the domesticated or?
Yeah, well, yeah, technically, yeah, but they found dozens of these stone plates. Some of them are, this big. They're beautifully carved. They're all different types of stone. And you notice the one in the middle there, like the grey one with the dip in it. That's a beautifully created cut mark. And we find cut marks all over these sites as well, which is another whole story. But these are beautifully created. Different types of stone come from different areas of the country, and they've created these very sophisticated stone plates. So whether they're too big just to eat your meal off, unless you're giants, but were they for sacraments? Were they ceremonial? Because they were found in between the T pillars, going around the outer edge. Because around the outer edge of the site, you have like these T-shaped pillars, but then you have benches almost between them. And at Karahan Tepe, you have actual T-shaped pillars and the benches carved from bedrock. At least 5 of them. One, the western side of it is actually entirely carved from bedrock. And then you have freestanding pillars because it's on a slight hill. So that really, really gets me. The sophistication and the technology here is pretty amazing. But these stone plates, I mean, I've actually compared these with Ben Van Kerkweg of the stone. We discussed this in an interview I did with him.
I think I watched that interview.
Yeah. And about, because they're not dissimilar to some of the stone vases or vases, you Americans say.
Well, we're two Brits.
Yeah, we're Brits. Yeah, we'll stick with the Brits. Yeah, and so there's elements of quite a sophisticated stone creation technology here in different aspects of it. Anyway, but yeah, Karahan Tepe really is, to me, in a way, it's more important than Göbekli Tepe in some ways, because we're finding not only this winter solstice alignment, we're finding very obscure designs in the whole site. We're finding very odd statues. There's could be evidence that there's water at the site as well, because you look at the structures, they're all kind of waterproofed. They're all carved from bedrock. They've even got areas where there's like wells going down into the ground as well, like little holes carved into the ground. Then you've got channels between them where water was being moved about. It's now been proven at Göbekli Tepe, for instance, that, and this actually Lee Clare did this, the main archaeologist there, that they found evidence of what they call rainwater harvesting. So they were collecting in these, they would create these giant, almost like bell-shaped underground chambers and collect water in them and use that as their kind of drinking and cooking water and things like that, with channels all around the site to collect them in different ways. And so, because there's no real springs, they choose these sites that don't really have springs or rivers or streams near them. I mean, some of the later sites do, like Navali Churi, that was next to the Kantara stream, that had the Euphrates River moving around nearby. And I mean, that's an interesting one as well. If we could just mention Navali Churi, this is a very interesting site. So this was one of the first ones discovered by Klaus Schmidt and others, and Harold Hauptmann as well, back in the 1980s. So this was the first indicator that there was something super ancient. This dates back to about 8,500 BC. So this was actually built next to water. This was built next to, pretty much the Euphrates River. But what's really interesting is that here, there's two real things here that really blow my mind. There's a structure which was about 16 meters long, about 45 feet long. And it was actually like, they realized it was actually like a house. It was like constructed, from wood and daub and whatever it was. And underneath, it had these kind of channels carved out of it, going crisscrossing across the site. And water from the stream was be controlled to move through these channels underneath the house, underneath the abode. Now, we know people were living at this site because it's all, definitely if you're near water, you end up living there. And what they found was that they would control the movement of the water under this house, and then they would pull it open up these little kind of little areas, and the cool air, and it would cool down the air within the structure. So we have the first air conditioning on the planet. Wow. Taking place, at Navali Churi in 8,500 BC. And so that I found really interesting, little details like that. No one talks about this, but this is published. This is published in an academic paper. I found this there, and they didn't say air conditioning, but that's what it is.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's actually what it is.
Sugarcoat it. That's what it's doing.
And that really got me. You know what I mean? It's like, I love that little detail. I mean, just to make yourself more comfortable where you live kind of thing. And also like Göbekli Tepe now, which is looking more and more like people ended up living there. Now, what the archaeologists say generally is that at places like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe is that people just lived there from day one. And what it appears like is that these were built as like temple sites, in my opinion, first. And then they were so impressed. I mean, you imagine if you're a hunter-gatherer and all you've seen is the landscape, the stars and the fields, the rivers, that's it. Then you walk into Göbekli Tepe in its prime. It would blow your mind. You wouldn't understand what the hell was going on. And so I think that it was so impressive and so mind-blowing to people. And there were these elites who I believe were running it, who were probably, very advanced individuals, like a different class of people. Then you've got to consider that side of things as well, that people would be attracted to go and live there, and they would move in, they would build their own structures next to the main temple sites. And so I think this is what was happening at these big sites. Whereas Navali Churi, which is 1,000 years later than Göbekli Tepe, really, it was built during the very end phase of Göbekli Tepe's use. These were much more domestic. There was more square structures being constructed. And so there's quite a lot to consider when you start looking into the little details of these different places.
No, it's truly fascinating. And admittedly, until you agreed to do this interview, I knew very, very little of Karahan Tepe other than the name. I didn't really know much about it, but certainly it feels as though there's a lot more intricacies than there is in Göbekli Tepe. One could argue.
Yeah, I haven't talked that much about Göbekli Tepe. I mean, Göbekli Tepe is insane.
Okay.
It's insane. I mean, it's just as insane as Karahan Tepe, and I think got to understand, Göbekli Tepe, only 5 to 7% has been uncovered.
Yeah, I was going to say
that's the reality check on that one. Okay. And then Karahan Tepe, maybe 10% has been uncovered. They could be more by now because they're really going for it there. Now, they slowed down at Göbekli Tepe partly because they were building new visitor center, new paths. They had to focus on the kind of protecting the site and things like that. So there's been a bit of a kind of conspiracy about it. They've stopped, excavation. And Lee Clare admitted they're not going to excavate all of the site. They're going to leave it 150 years or something like this. And that's a pity, and there's not much you can do about that. But I think a lot more is going to get excavated in our lifetime. So I think we've not got to worry too much. But yeah, so there's a lot more to be uncovered at all these sites. This is the beginning point, really. We're at the beginning point. We're living through a time where we're in the process of discovering the smoking gun of human kind of civilization on the planet. And I really believe this was the first civilization. I call it a super civilization because the elements of the sciences, the technology, the way they thought, the astronomy and everything else is different to a classical, what you term a civilization. But it is a civilization. It really, I know Michael Button's talked about this as well. And for a long time, I've been saying that. I mean, one of the other things, let's just look at a couple of examples of why I think this is the world's first super civilization. We stay at Navali Churi, for instance, which means Valley of the Plague. Not the most, in fact, let's just talk about Karahan Tepe's name, because Karahan Tepe means Hill of the Dark Lord. Oh, wow. Which is kind of a bit heavy metal, isn't it? I know you like your heavy metal. But the original name of Karahan Tepe was Göbekli Tepe. And Göbekli is interesting. Andrew Collins did some analysis of this. He spoke to locals, Kurdish people as well, and found that Göbekli Tepe, the KEC of Göbekli Tepe, which is the original first name, but they changed it to protect it from looters. The KEC basically is a feminine origin. So it's like it can refer to queen, goddess, daughter, woman, wife, things like this. So it's got this feminine aspect to it. Then we look at the name of Göbekli Tepe. Now it's got different variations, whether you're Kurdish or Turkish and things like this, but generally it means hill of the navel or hill of the belly, like a pregnant belly. It also can mean hill of the wishes. It can mean various other, variations around that. An interesting thing about Göbekli Tepe, at the very top of the hill is something called the wish tree, an ancient mulberry tree, where people up until, over the last few hundred years go up there and make wishes for a healthy birth and for fertility. And so it's actually got this kind of fertility aspect associated with it, which is very interesting. But anyway, we come back to Navali Churi, and they first found evidence of the use of an ancient form of concrete there, which is called terrazzo. Now, this is basically created from crushed limestone, with water and a few other bits and bobs within it. Sometimes they put larger stones in it to hold it together. And they would make floors from this. Sometimes they would carve the bedrock, make flat floors, but often they would create this technology, this concrete. And this is the first ever use of it known. It was at the time when they first discovered it in Navali Churi in the 1980s. This is one example of it we get from the site itself. But it would have covered the whole kind of floor of many of these sites. They found it at Göbekli Tepe. They found it at Karahan Tepe. They've now found it at older sites going into the Natufian era, which are even older. And originally, terrazzo, this form of concrete, which is waterproof as well, was only ever known to have existed with the Romans. And so this is 8,000-9,000 years before the Romans were around doing anything like this. And so that is a whole other thing as well. So they developed this technology, and you have to heat it up to get it to become like this firm concrete type substance. You have to heat it up to 850 degrees to do that. So they would have had to create these big kind of ovens with tons of this rubble and stone and powder going into it, then heat it up with water till it hardened. So they had this whole technological process of creating this concrete nearly 12,000 years ago, which is unheard of. I mean, this may sound arbitrary to people in our current era, but this was happening back then. So where did they come up with that idea? Where did it come from? I mean, this is when you go back to the watches and all the technologies and the things they had talk about in the Book of Enoch, they talk about kind of the hint at things like that. They were capable of, using these different technologies.
It would also explain why they would want to preserve that as a sort of time capsule. The talks are like we mentioned Randall Carlson before with the Younger Dryas and the floods. That's probably information and technology that they wanted to keep. So when this all blows over, metaphorically, they can come back and receive it or pass it on to us.
Yeah, and it was well preserved. I mean, many of these sites. That's the thing about these sites. It's like they were. Now there's been arguments about this as well, but there's the sites were deliberately buried at the end of their use. Fundamentally, now Göbekli Tepe, the enclosures that have been excavated, there were slope slides. This has been analysed by the archaeologists, where as the later constructions, people were building their village around the site, they kind of fell in and collapsed, midden heaps and things like that. So some of the enclosures were partly filled accidentally, naturally, but then at the end of their use, they clearly covered it all up. And so that's definitely what happened. There's been analysis, research, a paper published by the head archaeologist at Karahan Tepe called Neshmi Karal, who's proven that beyond doubt. And so they were kind of preserving the sites. But you must remember, when they excavated it, they found that much of the site, or some of the sites anyway, especially at Karahan Tepe, all the T-shaped pillars and statues have been deliberately smashed and broken and then buried. But the things were then placed, like the plates were all placed, these stone plates were all placed in position. There were certain statues were put upright, and then they buried it and then smashed some of it up. So what the hell was going on? It's almost like a ritual decommissioning of the site. But then you look at like the structure AB or the pillar shrine at Karahan Tepe with the stone head, the winter solstice illumination. That was all preserved and kept pristine and perfect, then buried. And so that was meant to be rediscovered in a way, I think. And then this is where they knew in the future, whoever discovered it would notice the winter solstice alignment and they would go, that's who we were. That's what we were doing back then. And so there's lots of little things like this. I want to stay on, can I stay on Navali Churi for a minute?
Yeah, go for it.
There's a interesting head that was found. I've actually got a 3D scan of it here. This is a 3D scan of a stone head. This is, they found many of these full body statues. There's Urfa Man. There's the one at Karahan Tepe now. But this one has got like a serpent on the back of the head. And this is what it looks like. So this is carved on the back of the head. Now, for those that are familiar with Vedic tradition, ancient Indian tradition, this is a Vedic priest ponytail called a Shika. And this is virtually exactly the same. So what on earth is that doing there, 8,500 BC, when Vedic culture wasn't even existing back then? Is that a coincidence? We don't know. I've actually just written a chapter about this. There's a whole thing about the Vedic connection with Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe and Navali Churi. I won't get into it too much now. It's a bit too in depth, I think. But what I can say is that I'm finding more and more evidence that the Vedic culture of India and Southeast Asia may have been connected with Southeast Turkey. Now, this is a whole other thing. This is really frustrating to some people to hear this because they don't want their culture to be associated or, this, that, and the other. But there's a gentleman called B.G. Siddharth who wrote a book in 1999 that he first mentioned that. And that really caught my attention. Because he didn't even know about Göbekli Tepe. It hadn't even been announced when his book came out, but he knew about Navali Churi. And he was already finding comparisons and between these great cultures. But the interesting thing, this could be a representation of a specific haircut, because clearly you've got the shaved head. Yeah, and we get that at some of the other statues as well. In fact, if we look at this image here, these are some of the other statues that have been found, and they all seem to have haircuts depicted on the statues. So these were fancy dudes, super fashionable. And you got the one on the right there. This is the most recent discovery at Karahan Tepe in the big new enclosure found at the top of the hill. And he's clearly got shaved sides of his head, a bit like yours, actually, Daniel. But he's got a mullet going down the back, not like yours, Daniel, and almost like a Mohican type thing. And then you have actual Mohicans found on some of the statues at Göbekli Tepe. And then you have other features here, like the middle right one, the middle left one there has almost got like a quiff coming up the top. And on the far left, you've got this big bun going behind the back of the head found at Karahan Tepe. And on the bottom there, you've got the Karahan Tepe statue as well, you know, the back of it. So you've got this kind of almost like a shaved side with a mullet. So and so when you have like anything that's shaved traditionally, if you have shaved parts of the head, and we have that with the seeker type thing from Vedic tradition, that often means this is a priestly person. This is someone who stands out from the crowd. And so again, this pushes the idea that these were more like, you know, used as temple type, you know, structures. They weren't just arbitrary domestic structures where they'd have meetings and things like that. There was something profound and sort of spiritual really going on here, in my opinion. And you can this can be pushed into other cultures as well. But we also have, you know, just to sort of push the idea of this Vedic connection briefly, we also have the Shiva Lingam tradition as well, which we find in India and Southeast Asia, all over, and we get it in different areas. And it was Charles Koss who first pointed this out to me. He's an awesome YouTuber, he's a friend of mine. And I want to give him credit. People check out Charles Koss and his channel. He's got some excellent videos. He's got a couple of cool books out as well. And he was the first to notice that the structure AB is like, or the pillar shrine is actually like a Shiva Lingam, where you possibly have liquid coming in. You have the phallic shaped symbol, you know, multiple in this case. And you would have the feminine aspect, the liquid, and also the entrances, like the yoni, you know, where the liquid would come in and out. And so there could be a connection there as well. Again, I go into that in more detail. I will be going into that in more detail in the book. So there's a lot of little intricacies. I mean, this is speculation, okay? So this is something the archaeologists will not accept, that there's a Vedic connection with Southeast Turkey. So this is, we admit this speculation. We're not like trying to say this is a fact. We're just putting ideas and trying to understand where the symbolism could have come from or where it even originated.
I mean, it's like what we said at the start of this conversation is myth originated from somewhere. You know, the Vedic traditions will have originated from somewhere. Who's to say that they didn't originate in closer to Turkey?
Yeah. I agree.
That's the thing. I think if you want to strip it all the way back to say, let's go with it, you know, evolution, you know, by all accounts, Homo sapiens started in the regions of Africa, but yet we're all over the world. So I think it ties into that sort of cherry picking the information that suits your narrative. Yeah. Rather than exploring options.
Well, I mean, people claim I cherry pick as well. I mean, that's kind of like, and it's fine. I don't mind that. I mean, I'm not bothered really, but I think, you know, we have to kind of consider that, you know, for example, we thought we'd found the oldest winter solstice alignment on the planet, and it probably is if you're looking at it in association with a megalithic site. It quite possibly is. There could be more ones are going to be discovered. Don't get me wrong, you know, we might, you know, but what we found when I started looking into this, I kept finding older and older solstice alignments associated with even earlier sites going back into the Paleolithic caves of Europe, which really blew my mind. It's actually Martin Sweatman kind of drew my attention to this. So I want to just mention that now because I got a feeling we're going to go off to look at some other megalithic sites and other areas. But this, I think, is really intriguing because this is something that I know Dan Richards does debunking channel. He's been starting to talk about a lot as well. And he's been putting it out there and discussing it a lot. And I agree with pretty much everything he says about this subject. And the reason why this is interesting is because when we go to sites like Lascaux Cave, for instance, if we look at this one here, well, let's first look at these. So these are like some of the kind of bone plaques that were found in some of these Paleolithic caves go back to 42,000 years old. In Europe, in the Dordogne Valley of France, there's some in Germany and other places. They found all these markings, which seem to be calendrical markings following the moon cycles, the annual solar cycles, and so forth. But then we actually have this. The top image there is actually Karahan Tepe. At the top of the hill, you've got these same numerical etchings in the top of you're not allowed to go up there anymore. And I've recreated it in that image. It's all in the book and everything, the little book, but it's also going to be in the next book as well. And so they were clearly marking calendrics in stone, similar to the bone plaques of Paleolithic Europe. But what really got me, which really blew my mind, is that the work on Lascaux Cave, which I visited recently with my family, actually, to go and have a look at this, because it was found, not only do they have kind of paintings that appear to depict constellations and, Taurus and the Pleiades and other such things, but the orientation of the cave entrance, and this is thanks to Martin when he drew me into this research, found that on the summer solstice sunset, okay, specifically the sunset at this site, the light would go deep into the cave through this entrance, which happens to be aligned to the summer solstice sunset, June the 21st. And at the end of the cave, a certain painting would become illuminated at the peak of the sunset. And so this was clearly chosen to be aligned so the whole cave would be illuminated by this huge long beam of light going in, like we find at Newgrange, like we now find at Karahan Tepe. But this goes back to between 17,000 and 22,000 years ago. And so that astonished me. Now, if you look more closely, there's a site called the Shelter of the Fish. We also tried to visit, but it was locked. This is actually someone tried to cut this out. This fish, this salmon, was carved into one of these caves. This goes back to, 25,000 years old. And it's an image of a salmon with the jaw pulled back. Now, mating season, male salmon jaws appear to come back a little bit for some reason. And that's always in December, towards the end of the year. And on the winter solstice sunrise, the sun comes into that chamber and illuminates that stone-carved fish on the winter solstice. And it's depicting a time of year where the salmon's jaw is pulled back like that naturally in part of their mating season. So we have this connection, and so they weren't carving out the caves. These were natural caves, but they were choosing the caves because they noticed at these times of year, specific extreme points of the year, they were getting illuminated. So this was taken a step further, and this was some brilliant French researchers did all this. They studied 130 Paleolithic caves of France and found that 122 of them aligned to the solstices or equinoxes, which is astonishing count of number when you look at the amount. And then more analysis was done, and they found that a majority of them aligned to the winter solstice, which again blew my mind because this is a tradition that clearly went from 40,000 years ago all the way to the time of Karahan Tepe. And so even though these aren't megalithic sites, these aren't sites that are built to incorporate these alignments, they had a great understanding of the solstices and the equinoxes going back into the deep Paleolithic. And all the analysis that's been done on this, I talked about this before in other podcasts. I got a couple of articles up about this. I got a new article coming out on Graham Hancock's website in the next couple of months. It's going to be in the next book, obviously. It was basically, we've pretty much proven that the solstices, and this is what the anthropologists say as well in hunter-gatherer groups, there was this obsession with understanding the movements of the sun through the year. They really got it down, and the moon as well. And then later the stars as well in other traditions. And so if that's the case, then Karahan Tepe is just a legacy of this. Likewise, Stonehenge is an even later addition to this whole story. So it just moves through time, going back deep into time. So even the hunter-gatherers were sophisticated enough to have a full understanding of the movements of the sun and the moon. And that's not really accepted. It's not really accepted knowledge. And so that blew my mind that is the case. And whilst we mentioned Stonehenge, we should also consider Stonehenge, which is famous, it's my local site, famous for its summer solstice sunrise and the sun rising down the avenue in the distance, rising up over the Hillstone. And it sort of sits on the Hillstone, other such things. But there's evidence now, and this is due to these post holes they found at the site, which, Stonehenge is dated to 5,000 years old, more or less. These post holes are 10,000 years old. Yeah, but the interesting thing, these were giant pine post holes marking the position of Stonehenge, or like 50 yards from the main site, only discovered in 1967. But what they also found was, before Stonehenge was built, at the exact position where Stonehenge is now, there used to be a mound there, and they found Mesolithic tools and flints and ash inside it. At the bottom of the hill, along the alignment of what is now the summer solstice sunrise, another mound called Newell's Mound is found at the bottom of the hill. And along where the avenue was carved out to mark this solstice alignment were two natural features called periglacial strips going down. And these are like natural features that occur due to the movement of ice across the landscape. And so somehow they were measuring the summer solstice using natural and built mounds going back 10,000 years at Stonehenge, long before the megaliths were put in place, 5,000 years before any megaliths were put in place. So this goes back to the era, close to the era of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, but in the Stonehenge landscape. And we know people were living there because there's a site called Blick Mead, which they found evidence of Mesolithic kind of culture living there back then. So we've got this kind of thing going on. People don't even realize that about Stonehenge. They don't know that it was being used as a solstice marker. And we're talking about the alignment of the summer solstice sunrise going to the northeast, going in the opposite direction. So if you go and stand at the bottom of the hill, the slope, and look back up the periglacial strips to Stonehenge 10,000 years ago, the mound where Stonehenge is now, the sun would have set on the winter solstice perfectly into that, if you're standing at that mound at the bottom of the hill. So that's how beautiful this whole situation is. And now it's celebrated. Now you can go there and you can have 30,000 people turn up, which is often happens. It's pretty much my back garden. And celebrating it now, but they don't know it's 10,000 years old. They were kind of doing this. So that blows my mind as well. And that's the tip of the iceberg, honestly. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more sites, even in Scotland, other places, that go back to this era and the solstice was being observed.
It's fascinating how the obsession with the skies seemed to stay palatable for so many years, because we talk about the context of time. You can say 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. To wrap your head around that, I mean, a human, if you're lucky, you might live to 80, 100 if you look after yourself. That's a smidge of time by comparison. And obviously things, especially in this day and age, things are forever evolving and changing. And, a couple of years ago, it was we didn't even have the internet. We didn't have mobile phones. Who knows what we will have in years to come. Yeah. But it's just fascinating how when you extrapolate that over a long period of time, that the skies were still so revered by the inhabitants of the earth at that period, which I find amazing.
It's amazing. But again, you come back to that point you made earlier of no distractions. There's no distractions really back then. I mean, if you're living, you could be in an abundant area where there's a lake or a river, there's fish everywhere, there's animals you can eat, there's plants naturally growing everywhere. You can have a lot of spare time on your hands.
Quite right. Yeah.
There's no iPhones to jump on and doom scroll. There's that you'd be like looking at the sky and that would be your doom scrolling, just like looking at the movements, and you create stories and myths out of that kind of thing. And you notice the sun would only rise that far north and that far south on the horizon. Then it would twice a year it would go east. You're like, hang on a sec, the equinox. And you'd observe these kind of things, and you would just, you'd be questioning why is this happening? What is that? Where am I? You wouldn't even, would you even know you're on the earth in Paleolithic days? It was an earth, you're born into this reality. You don't know what's going on.
We have come at quite a good time where we certainly in this generation, we're born with so much knowledge now.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you was born back then, you probably wouldn't understand the concepts of consciousness, and which we still know very little about now, but you probably wouldn't understand all that is in front of you or above you. Whereas now, at least we have answers for certain things, don't we?
Yeah.
Or we think we have answers for certain things, at least.
Well, the science.
Yeah.
Answers of things.
There's the science, which doesn't always get it right, admittedly. But
there's the metaphysical side as well. But again, I believe these ancient people were like tuned in a different way to us. I mean, I'm talking even up to a few hundred years ago, potentially as well. There was a natural deep intuition. There was a natural GPS we had. We knew, we kind of felt we knew where we were on the planet. And I think a lot of these sites, the way they're placed across the landscape is partly intuitive. But we're built into this universe which is geometric, it's numerical, it's number. And so I think we have to keep that in mind, that we naturally have that within us. Our cells form in geometric ways into 3D, platonic solids and Archimedean solids and things like this. So it's within our DNA and we don't even know it. that there's this kind of thing. But I think the intuitive side of things and the metaphysical side of things is very important, because I think you look at the Irish traditions or Scottish traditions as well, of like the fairy realm and things like that. I think there's a lot more of that going on in prehistory as well. There was like being able to be so still and observant, you would pick up on the natural energies of different, life, forms around you, whether it be animals, plants, or the elemental realm. You just don't know. And so I think, we have to consider that we're very much in this scientific world, and we're at the kind of almost like a low point, a high point in some ways, but a low point of human consciousness, in my opinion. If you look at the great cycles of the Hindu traditions and things like that, the Kali Yuga and other such things. And so back then, I believe, if we go back 12,000 years, that was kind of like towards the end of a great cycle, and they wanted to record and keep everything in stone. Like, I believe, like Göbekli Tepe, and some of the archaeologists now talk about this, is that this wasn't the beginning of it. This was like the end of almost like a Paleolithic, Mesolithic tradition of all this knowledge they accumulated over generations, thousands of years. And they thought, we need to make this permanent, and become like a teaching tool to teach people about what we know. And I think they would carve it into stone to do that. It was almost like a memory space, like, carving them into, like Aborigines have memory, related song lines, where they'd have a song or a myth at each site as they walk the landscape, and it would become ingrained into the landscape and the consciousness. Likewise, you can do that at megalithic sites as well. You can ingrain like focused intention, and knowledge and history into these sites.
Quite profound. We've sort of cued them in a few times, so it'd be a travesty if we don't talk about these giants that you speak of, Hugh.
Oh, okay.
Talk to me how you've come to and when you say giants, like Graham Hancock has referenced these before, and he sort of gets confused with, not him personally, but people confuse his theories of, these are giants of knowledge. But are you on about physical, like fee, fi, fo, fum type giants? Or
fee, fi, fo, fum? Yeah, that should be my kind of moniker, that really. The giants thing. I mean, right, I want to put the record straight. I don't necessarily believe in giants, okay? But I believe in the thousands of accounts of, from academic journals, news reports, everything else, of these giants and all the discoveries that have been made, because you can't really go around saying, giants are real and things like that. But I've got 2 books I've worked on with Jim Vieira. It took us probably a total of 7 years or 8 years to put those together. And we've discovered thousands of accounts in the academic record, in newspaper reports, obviously in the mythology of virtually everywhere on the planet. Even discoveries being made recently, in certain places, of very large skeletons. Now, we're not talking giants as in like 50-foot tall giants. We're talking like people who are 7 foot to 10 feet tall. It's not that extreme. We know, for instance, if you go back in, a couple of 100,000 years, you have Homo heidelbergensis as well. This was they were known giants. These were like pretty much humans, and they were routinely 7 feet tall. And there's evidence of, an example of a femur they found in South Africa. The person must have been 9 to 10 feet tall. Must have been, if you look at the length of the femur, unless he had weirdly long thighs. And so the evidence is there. Then we have the Denisovan discoveries, the teeth, the finger bones, the skull fragments. We have various other discoveries that are being made, the jawbone that was found off the coast of Taiwan. And clearly there were giant human type beings around in deep prehistory. Now, you look into the Book of Enoch, you look into the stories of the Nephilim, you can get into all that. They talk about these giants. You have David and Goliath. You have all this kind of stuff. But what is, I think, the most fascinating aspect of this is, like, firstly, why is every myth on the planet, virtually every myth, got giants associated with the creation of megalithic sites? Secondly, why are there so many official academic accounts of giant bones and skeletons being found worldwide, and they're completely dismissed as being hoaxes, all of them? This is what really gets me, because in our book, Giants on Record, we're not like, me and Jim aren't, we're not dumb. We know what, we know we're going to get ridiculed, and we have been ridiculed. We're being attacked a lot because when this book came out, it caused a bit of a sensation. We also had a TV show called Search for the Lost Giants on History Channel. And we're very tongue-in-cheek. You know, we don't take it 100% seriously, but we do take the accounts we discover very seriously, because if you've got the Smithsonian who are potentially trying to cover up the whole giants thing, why is it that in their own annual reports that came out of the late 1800s, they have 17 accounts in them talking about 7 to 8 foot tall skeletons being found in the mounds of North America? Stonehenge, for instance, just near Stonehenge in a place called Salisbury, it's the main town, near Stonehenge, really. In the early 1500s, Sir Thomas Eliot is a well-known scholar. He wrote the first Latin dictionary. He was an MP for Cambridge and things like this. He witnessed and partly discovered what he claims was a 14-foot, 10-inch skeleton at a place called Ivy Church Priory, which I've been to. I know where that is. In this log coffin deep in the ground. And it was witnessed by 20 people, many of them well-known people at the time, who came to see it. They vary the height from 12 foot 10 to 14 foot 10 for some reason. But it was witnessed by multiple people, discussed in the early 1500s. And there's no way they would just make that up. This is what's so interesting. It's like, but it's disappeared now. You can't find it anywhere. Very few of these skeletons have survived, especially in North America, because of the NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, where the Native Americans take them away. Any grave goods or skeletons of Native Americans, they rebury in a ritualistic way, which is cool. Don't get me wrong. But also removes all the evidence as well. But there were many of these skeletons and bones on display at universities, museums, and other places, photographed, documented, measured. And so you can't just dismiss them out of hand. And the people that do that, it's unscientific. This is what annoys me. I know various, even alternative researchers, but also many archaeologists who just dismiss it and claim we're stupid, we don't know what we're talking about. They clearly haven't read our books. I mean, we're thorough. We go deep into all the records. We would sit there and go through microfilms at libraries for days on end to find one account, in some weird kind of medical journal or something like that from the late 1800s of a 9-foot skeleton. And there it is. It's been documented, it's been measured. And so, I think we have to kind of give it a bit of credence, I think, and keep an open mind about it. Because I know, there's this story of this Kandahar giant. It was a live giant who kind of battled some military guys in Afghanistan some years ago. I don't know about that kind of thing, but I think just look at the data. Don't dismiss it until you've looked at the data. And I recommend, I'll send anyone a copy of my book if they want to read it, for God's sake. You don't have to buy it, whatever, but just check out the accounts. We have 250 accounts in our book, Giants on Record, in North America alone. But we know of probably 1,500 accounts, and more get discovered as more microfilm is turned into online data, which you can then go and look at. And we have a whole team of researchers, there's several people online doing this, who are finding more and more. So I find it absolutely fascinating. Now, I've kind of moved on from the giants thing. Our last book came out in 2021 on the giants of Britain, which I really enjoyed writing, I must admit, with Jim. We had a great kind of journey putting these books together. But at the same time, we realize it kind of, people look at that and then they look at my Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe research, and they kind of put the two together, think, he's just talking nonsense. So that's the problem we have with that. We're kind of being slightly ridiculed for it. But at the same time, you know what? I don't really care anymore, because we've got the data. We've mixed myths. For example, you would find myths of Stonehenge. The myth is that it was created by giants moving stones from Africa to Ireland, then they got moved over here, and Merlin then moved them over here. But giants were associated with that. It's called the Giants' Dance. Is the earliest known name of Stonehenge, which comes from Coria Gigantum, the Welsh name for it. There's also this story of the Kanjic giants as well. This is a book from 1666, which talks about this tribe of giants that came from Wales, again, from Mold in Wales, and built Stonehenge as a trophy to one of their battles. And then we have two accounts. We have the 14-foot, 10-inch account from Salisbury. We have another one from 1719 of a 9-foot, 4-inch skeleton being found, again, at a mound near Salisbury. So And that's in several newspapers, got published and then forgotten about. And so what do you make of that? And then you actually have traditions from the 1470s in Salisbury itself, again, the closest town to Stonehenge, of a giant effigy, like 18 foot tall, being paraded around town on St. John the Baptist Day, which is just after the summer solstice. And why would they do that from the 1400s onwards, parade this giant around? And then eventually he became known as St. Christopher, who was a known Canaanite giant who became kind of Christian as such and is famous for carrying baby Jesus across a river. And so there's all these odd connections you keep finding. And, you have to kind of consider, where do these myths really come from? Is it based on some kind of reality? Or not, or is it just completely made up? And no, but I believe what Hancock says, well, these are giants of intellect and giant prowess in their kind of way of, they were able to build sites. And some people will say it's the only way you can explain how sites were being built, because they must have had giants building them. But I think that if you look at the data, this is where the real mystery lies, because how can there be this many accounts? Were all of them made up? Were academics lying? That doesn't add up to me.
So would you say the giants built the Great Pyramids?
Right. I don't know about that. I don't know the answer to that.
It was a great soundbite, though.
I'll give you the credit. I don't know the answer. But there are myths of giants building the pyramids in Egypt. I mean, this is something that I have to admit, I actually found this on Jason Colavito's site, on his blog, where he's criticized us regularly. But he did this huge analysis of all the Arabian myths of the Egyptian giants building the pyramids, building Dendera Temple, the Dashur pyramids and other such things that came from the land of Ad. And there were all these different named giants who came over to Egypt and built the pyramids and built the temples there, basically. So there are myths that go back at least 1,000 years that talk about that. And so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's all that as, I did that to sort of segue to Egypt, but I want to briefly mention as well the giants. There's loads of giant stories for Baalbek as well.
There is, Baalbek. Oh my God, there are a few. Yeah, there's actually, I think they actually found a skull there as well. Like
did they find? Ago. I mean, I've Baalbek's always kind of been off my radar until recently.
Yeah, we go.
But I am massively hooked. I watched your YouTube video on it the other day, actually.
So I've got an image of Baalbek here. This is Baalbek is insane. I mean,
yeah, it's fascinating. Isn't it?
Traditionally, it's a Roman site. This is what the story is. But this is in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. Now, clearly, you can't go there now, unfortunately. We were actually planning, we've done a couple of tours there back in 2018, but we were planning to go there this year as a tour, but that's not happening.
Yeah, you probably want to give that a wide berth.
But we've got this great guy called Pierre, who's our tour guide. He's a dynamite. He's dynamo, that guy. But this is the Great Trilithon. So this is different to trilithons in like Stonehenge. These are 3 stones in a row, about 30 feet up in this huge wall on the western wall of Baalbek Temple. This is actually some stones in the northern wall. This is a different part of the site, but still gigantic. It's actually me in the photos there. I'm like that, tiny.
Little smudge, yeah.
So some of the stones here, they're basically, these ones are 500. The western wall, the trilithon is 800 tons apiece. These are 500 tons apiece. And there's one inside the temple here. So you can see that there. And this is one of the stones next to a blue bin, of all things, just so you can get some scale. I actually wrote a big article about this in Atlantis Rising magazine when that existed several years ago, looking at the myths and the stories of the giants of this particular area. Because there are stories that go back into this whole, the mythology that you have, like the Nephilim and so forth, associated with this. But this is the quarry. This is where it gets interesting. So this is the one on top there is called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Why is it called that? I don't really know.
It's based on a story that started there.
It could be,
I don't know how.
I'm not really sure, but it's interesting that it's got this pregnancy thing, because that's what you get. This is very similar to Göbekli Tepe. You have that same thing where it's like a pot-belly navel pregnant hill. So there's weird connotations there. But then recently in 2014, I think it was, they found, this weighs roughly 1,000 tons, yeah? But they found one just beneath it, which weighs 1,642 tons or thereabouts, which is even bigger. But none of these were moved. So these are the heaviest stones. There's another one in the quarry just around the corner from that as well, which is 1,240 tons as well, I think. So these are pretty damn big, when you think about it. And this is about half a mile from Baalbek, the temple. So this is where the other stones came from that weigh 800 tons. Half a mile, slight slope up to Baalbek Temple, and they managed to move them and lift them 30 feet in the air. So
whenever I talk about the giants to people, I signpost them to Baalbek.
Yeah.
And how else are you moving that kind of weight?
Yeah, so there are old traditions from the area that talk about, I mean, I've got a couple of notes here because this was a few years ago I did this. There was like Kronos as well. He gets a mention in this. He's one of the old kind of Greek gods. And there's all these other biblical references to giants that are linked with this area. I mean, if anyone wants to screen grab that, they can. There's from Genesis, from Numbers, King Og of Bashan and things like this, all linked with this particular area. But I think we have to consider Baalbek. One of the interesting things, I mean, when I went there with Pierre and our group, Andrew came with us on one of the trips as well, Andrew Collins. What it is that at the main temple site itself, so we've got the main kind of, the main temple kind of site, where you have the temple of Jupiter and so forth. All these giant granite pillars are placed there, which are amazing in their own right. There's a huge, almost like a megalithic platform of these mega blocks. Huge they are. And it's clearly the Roman temple was then built on top of that. But even below the level of these mega blocks, there's Phoenician ruins, which go back to the Bronze Age pretty much. So we're talking like 1500 to 2000 BC. And then there's traditions and there's points have been found, spear points and things like that, that suggest that this could be up to 7,000 years old. This area, this high point in the landscape, that this was actually first occupied. So this was an occupational mound, like a tepe of the traditions that we find at Göbekli Tepe. But what's particularly interesting about this, I think I mentioned this earlier, and I've got another image of it here, if we can actually find that, is that there's a direct connection geodetically between Göbekli Tepe and the site of Baalbek itself, if I can actually find it. Again, this is the work of Howard Crowhurst, if we find that here. So on the right-hand side here, you've got this, 6 squares making this large rectangle. The angle between Baalbek and Göbekli Tepe is a perfect kind of diagonal of that particular system. Now, this is called modular geometry. We find that actually inside Göbekli Tepe, which marks north, south, east, and west as well, by the way. And so there's a lot of intricacies when we start looking at this. And I think I've got another one here, somewhere, and it does suggest that there were direct connections between, these great sites in deep antiquity. So we've got it here. You can see the diagonal there across the landscape. And even the orientation, this is actually Howard Crowhurst here, the orientation of the temple, the diagonal points directly as well exactly to Göbekli Tepe. It's almost like these these tepes, or hoyuks they're called as well, were all kind of connected. And this would have been, I believe, part of the survey carried out by the pre-Göbekli Tepe or the Göbekli Tepe builders. This was one of the sites they went south to and they marked it. And later it became a revered site, linked with the Watchers, the Nephilim, and so forth. And so, this is a pretty epic place. And here's, this is this is the other quarry. The image on the right is the second quarry. There's 2 quarries there. That's the 1,240 ton stone. And the one on the left is obviously the stone of the pregnant woman, and the 1,642 ton stone. And also we must remember that, there were still quarried. And one of the things about the quarries as well is that I believe that they were deliberately left there as part of this tradition of marking the birthplace of the temple. I've written a few articles about this years ago, because we have the largest stone of Karahan Tepe still in the quarry. We have the largest stone of Göbekli Tepe still in the quarry. We have the largest stone on Easter Island, largest moai, still in the quarry. And so I think this was partly deliberate. It wasn't just Stonehenge as well. We have the Bluestone Quarry. Of
course, yeah.
And that's all geodetically linked. Like this, we actually find the quarry is actually geodetically linked by giant Pythagorean triangles across the landscape. And so we have to kind of consider that there's something else going on.
Yeah, it's beyond the realms. It's no longer coincidence, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
When you're finding so many examples from all different sites.
But Baalbek is epic.
It's,
I mean, oh God, everyone has to go there at some point.
I need to get out there, man.
Be careful if you go.
Well,
soon.
I say that with bated breath. Believe it or not, we're coming up to the 3-hour mark here, Hugh, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. So we've definitely got to look at doing a part 2. Before I ask you our bow out question, where can people, obviously we'll link everything in anyway, we'll collab with you, all that good stuff. But if there's any projects, you've mentioned your work a few times, this is your opportunity to basically sell yourself to my audience.
Yeah, for sure. People can just find me. They can search Hugh Newman. There's not many Hugh Newmans around apart from a butterfly expert, Hugh Newman.
Don't look for the butterfly expert.
And megalithomania.co.uk. We're on all the different social media things and everything. We run a conference every year in Glastonbury, early May. Our 20th anniversary is 2026, so we're doing pretty good with that. Very focused on the megalithic arts and sciences. So you can come along. We do like 2-day conference, then we do 3 days of tours as well. We also run the Origins conference every November in Wiltshire. It's local to me, and that's more focused on the deep origins of civilization, going back before the time of the megaliths. Some of the things we'll be getting into here. That's a collaboration with Andrew Collins. We run tours around the world. People are very welcome to join us. I've got some up on the screen here, our next bunch of tours. We invite special guests. We go to Turkey, although we did have to postpone the most recent one because of the issues out there at the moment. But that's all going to be fine. So we go to Turkey, we're going to India, we're going to other places like Peru and other areas. Obviously, we do ones in my area around Stonehenge.
I was going to say, are you doing one with Pravan Mohan?
Pravi Mohan, yeah.
Yes, that lab. I'm going to inquire about that.
Yeah, come along, man. It'll be fun.
He seems. I've never met him, but he seems like quite the character.
Pravi Mohan is epic. I love him, man. He's. I've met him in India when I travelled there. He's been over to England a few times. We always meet up. We go exploring. He's a cool dude. Yeah. I love him.
I need to get him on the show. You'll have to put in a good word.
Well, he's going to be here in July. So
okay,
there you go.
We'll see what we can source.
Yeah, for sure. And I've got a couple of books out. Obviously, we've got the Little Göbekli Tepe book. That's the one.
Which I'll get this.
Yeah, for sure.
One in particular. I read this in a week. I was expecting it to be really thick. I didn't realise it was only a small one.
That's the small. We've got a bigger one coming out. Trust me. Yeah. So I'm doing one with JJ Ainsworth, who's my partner. She's also the co-discoverer of the Winter Solstice alignment at Karahan Tepe. So we're doing a proper sized book, obviously, on that. That's going to be another 6 months to a year in the making. That's going to go fully in depth. There's a lot of stuff I haven't talked about, which I'm going to save for the book because I want that to be, exclusive.
Well, this will just for the record, this will go out second week in May.
Okay.
So I'll give you the full date off.
No problem. And and obviously we've got the Giants books out. I collaborated with Jim Vieira. I've contributed to several other books like Megalith Studies in Stone and Geomancy, published by Wooden Books. And we do a kind of occasional podcast, Megalithomania podcast, because I've interviewed tons of people over the years.
Loads of people. I didn't realise how many. I think with the way the YouTube algorithm works is unless you've done a podcast with, say, a bigger name like a Joe Rogan, it kind of sometimes gets, until you're purposely searching for it, it kind of just falls under the shuffle. And then I realised how many people you've chatted to.
Well, the thing is, I started doing that before podcasts existed. We were doing it just as interviews and putting them on YouTube and stuff. And so we've started putting all the old interviews back on YouTube, putting all our old lectures, because some people haven't heard them from our early conferences. And I'm doing a few more interviews. I find it really fascinating to actually do your job, sit down and actually grill kind of researchers. And I find it useful for my research as well, because I can get into their, other researchers or authors' minds and get details which, can, really help get a deeper understanding, more personal understanding, and helps me with my research as well, which I find really useful. So I look up to, I've got a lot of respect for the people I try and get on my podcast as well. But you've had a great lineup on it as well.
I make it a rule of only chat to people who I'm genuinely interested and fascinated by, and it's worked out well so far, so I'm going to continue doing that.
No, for sure.
We've turned down quite a lot of people who I won't name any name, maybe off camera I'll tell you, but we've turned down a few people who probably would have drawn in the views, but I've just no interest in chatting to them.
No, for sure.
I think you've got to be true to yourself, haven't you? Front?
I agree. Yeah. And people can check it. We've got a few other projects on the go. I can't off the top of my head. Like I say, I'm working on this 3D reconstruction of Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe now with Kevin Esslinger. That's a project we're working on. And we're going to develop that to a point where we're going to place the night sky and have everything fully reconstructed. And we're going to hopefully have, we want to get our Karahan Tepe Solstice discovery published academically. We're hopefully going to be able to do that through the course that I'm doing with the Skyscape Academy, hopefully, because we really want that to become, if it doesn't get known about, if it doesn't get, accepted by the archaeologists, they are in the process of building a roof over Karahan Tepe. Now, this is an issue because they might build it, and because they're dismissing our discovery, they could easily block our alignment forever. Mm-hmm. So we're fighting against that. And luckily, the recent roof they're planning to build, this is an exclusive. I've not mentioned this. It's been a delay. Okay. It hasn't been accepted, the proposal for the roof they had planned. In fact, let me just show you. I mean, this is the actual roof they have planned was pretty damn big, actually. So let me just show you this. So this is the roof they had planned. Oh, wow. They were going to build over it. And that was supposed to be going up this year. It was supposed to actually start late last year, but it's been delayed and now it's been cancelled. And so they have to bring in this whole other design. So that's going to take even longer. So hopefully we're going to get in there again. So we went in there last December to have a look. And we did that semi-officially as well. We had like a whole production team working with us. But hopefully by this December, we might be able to get official permission to go in there and actually measure the solstice with some people who are, proper archaeoastronomers as well, with the people I'm working with on this course. That's the plan. And then get the data we need to publish an academic paper. Then once it's out in that realm, you can't really ignore it. You can ignore it until it's published academically. That's what I've learned. This is how this whole thing works. I don't really want to publish an academic paper, but I might have to. And it's going to help protect the site, protect the alignment as well. That's another our intention is to enable that to be protected. So that's another project we're working on. And obviously by creating the 3D models with Kevin Esslinger, we can actually do our own research there without having to go to the site as well. So we can use a bit of both.
Awesome. Well, all power to you, man. And for those of you who haven't checked out Hugh's channel on YouTube, is it Megalithomania? Is that how it's pronounced?
Pretty much.
So I highly recommend. I was binge watching a load of his videos in preparation for this. They're really easy. They're very reminiscent to Uncharted X, but of course you're a British accent. So it's sometimes, maybe it's bias on my part, but sometimes more enjoyable, or certainly more, you can kind of, I understand that reference. So before we wrap up, Hugh, we ask this question to all our guests, and it's, what does challenge mean to them? So what does challenge mean to Hugh Newman?
What does challenge mean to me? That's an interesting one. That you can look at that from different perspectives. There's very personal perspectives. For example, not many people know this, but I've kind of trained myself in meditation for many years. And before I did that, I was a bit of a mess. I got to be honest with you. And I think the challenge for me was my mind, and I think a lot of people, are challenged by this monkey mind that the Buddhists call it, where you're constantly kind of battling with, what's going on in your head. And it's hard to get focused and driven into what you're doing. And I found that was the biggest challenge, learning how to meditate properly. And I've been doing it for 25 years now. I did it this morning before we came here. I had to get up early to do that. And I find that is a lot of people who are challenged by the busyness, the chaos of the world. That is one of the tools I find is essential. And to learn that can be a challenge, but once you get into the rhythm of it, my God, it's just completely transformed my life. So I'm quietly, I'm not really a Buddhist, but I studied the techniques of that to train myself. I don't really talk about it. This is the first time second time I maybe mentioned it. And so I have this real affinity when I go to places like Cambodia or India, because there's often, Cambodia is like Buddhist country, and you just connect with that. These people have been brought up to meditate and live that kind of way of living. So I very strongly believe in that as a very good thing. When it comes to the other side of if you're a researcher or an author and you want to kind of, get your research out into the world, you have to really ignore, you get challenged by academics, you get challenged even by your peers in the alternative world who don't believe what you're doing or anything like that. You've got to ignore them and just focus 100% on what you're doing. And as long as you're kind of sensible and you can back yourself up with research, you can like get things published, you can get stuff out there, and you can have a solid foundation for, you know, being a creator, whether it's on YouTube or doing, you know, like, you know, you pick and choose your guests. You know, you don't just have anybody coming on because they're going to get the views. And likewise, you know, like our conference, for instance, we pick and choose our speakers, like our guests that come on our tours. We pick and choose them. We're very focused on what we want. And I think you've got to just forge your own path, because you can get so distracted in this day and age and get involved in Twitter battles that go on forever. And I think when it comes to that side of things, if you're trying to push forward with your research, you've got to understand there are challenges. You're going to get pushbacks, and you have to just keep pushing forward and like getting the data to back you up. So that they're my two kind of things, which I find very useful. And I think as well, you've got to really just listen to yourself, you know, what you believe, and follow your intuition, follow your own guidance. And also, I think as you get older, you have to like not really seek approval from anybody. Like people have this, they seek approval from their parents, from their peers and things like this. You have to, I think getting over that has really helped me, because now I don't seek approval from anybody. I just crack on. If I do get approval off, you know, or kind of good comments off my peers, I appreciate it, but I don't rely on it like I used to. You know, where you think that you need that to drive yourself forward. So that's another thing that really kind of fascinates me, the way you can change the way your mind functions in relation to other people, and also your own research as well.
Cheers for sharing that. And I think a common thread throughout this interview is we have too many distractions these days, and we can probably look to our ancestors for guidance in that front, and politically put it yourself there now. That's pretty much what you're doing now. So, Hugh, I've enjoyed speaking to you. This has been fascinating. We're definitely going to have to do a part 2, because, like I said before, I feel as though there's a lot further down this rabbit hole we could go. But no, appreciate your time, Hugh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel.
I've been Daniel Hodges. This has been the incredible Hugh Newman, and you've been watching the Hodge-Cast. Take it easy. Well, folks, if you made it this far, I'm going to take a wild guess and say that you enjoyed that conversation. And if you did, and you want to help us keep bringing you interviews like this, I've got one small favour to ask, and it won't cost you a single penny. Hit that subscribe button. It might seem small, but it makes a huge difference. More reach means a bigger platform, and a bigger platform means bigger guests, bolder conversations, and more explosive topics to dive into. Here on the Hodge-Cast, we're all about high-impact conversations that challenge narratives, expose truth, educate and inspire. Whether that's fitness, geopolitics, religion, science, history, mindset, philosophy, or the conversations you're not supposed to have. We'd love to have you along for the ride. So go on, hit that subscribe, and let's take the Hodge-Cast to the next level.